PJ Jelly. 2014. It was a quiet Sunday night in this peaceful suburban county halfway between Richmond and the nation's capital.
It's a bedroom community for both Washington, D.C. and Richmond. People who live here often commute one way or the other.
Spotsylvania County is very quiet, a very safe place to live and raise your family and children.
And that would make what was coming even more frightening for the people who drove home to Spotsylvania every evening, normally leaving big city worries behind. It started at 11:30 that evening when co-workers of a Spotsylvania woman named Lynn Mercer called the sheriff's department.
On the evening of May 18th, 2014, Lynn Mercer was scheduled to work at her job as a registered nurse in the hospital in Washington, D.C.
But Lynn hadn't come in that night.
It was very unusual for her to not show up to work on time or without calling to say that she would not be there or to be late.
Her coworkers called the Spotsylvania Sheriff's Office in order to have a welfare check conducted on her at her home.
Alerted by Lynn's coworkers, the department dispatched a deputy to Lynn's address on the western end of the county, well away from the I-95 corridor.
There's farmland out there, and several people have horse farms and cattle. This particular house was maybe a quarter of a mile off the hard road on a gravel road.
It's kind of a remote area, which, the neighbors are far apart.
When the deputy arrived, Lynn's car was in the driveway. But was the 60-year-old nurse already in bed?
There were no lights on in the house. I knocked on the door, received no answer, didn't hear anything inside except dogs barking. There was no movement inside the house. No lights came on or anything.
Then, after knocking again, the deputy tried the door.
Actually reached down and grabbed the doorknob, turned it and pushed on it, and the door opened up.
But there was little that could prepare the deputy for what awaited him, because just inside the door, he found Lynn Mercer.
It was clear that she had been shot.
They could see visible trauma to the body, at least two bloody areas on her chest.
There had not been any struggle. It just appeared she had been ambushed.
Although assassinated might have been more accurate.
There were no signs of life.
The shooting left Lynn's quiet suburban community terrified.
You have a, middle-class white woman dead at her home. What happened? So there was a lot of questions surrounding this case in the community.
But was it a random crime, one that threatened the whole community? Or was there something evil lurking within Lynn's family? Lynn Mercer was a mother of 6. The 2 oldest were from her first marriage.
She and my father were divorced when I was young. So most of my early memories are of Mom being single.
Melissa and her brother were still little when their mother met Bob Mercer.
I met Lynn at a dinner party hosted by mutual friends. I thought she was very attractive, and so I started talking with her.
Soon, Lynn and Bob were dating, and before long, she brought him home to meet her 2 children.
We really liked him, and so we were very happy that Mom got married.
Together, Lynn and Bob would go on to have 4 more children. Although, since Bob was in the military, it wasn't entirely the end of Lynn's days raising her kids alone.
We got married, and 3 days later, I deployed to Turkey for a year.
And he would be in and out of the country regularly for the next 6 years, including 1988, the year that Elena was born.
She was born at Walter Reed Hospital, 9 months to the date after I'd come back from a deployment.
Although soon after, Elena's father was promoted to a desk job that allowed the family to settle in suburban D.C.
We moved to Fredericksburg, Virginia, and she spent the majority of her childhood in that house.
It was a crowded house, too. Elise, the youngest of the 6, was born 2.5 years after Elena.
We always had a lot of family. My sister Elena and I shared a room for almost half my life. As small children, we were pretty close.
In fact, the whole family was close, especially once Lynn went back to school to pursue her nursing degree.
We had to help out a lot, take the kids on walks. We would do things like do their hair. My brother and I would play games with them, etc. So it was just part of being the oldest kids.
Fawned over by her older siblings, Elena grew to be a beautiful little girl.
She had, that face of an angel. She was a very funny and sweet and adorable little girl.
And she was talented, too.
Elena was, I'd say, gifted in terms of some of the arts. She sang very, very well. She played the piano.
She loved to dance. That was a big thing around the house. She enjoyed ballet.
But what Elena loved most of all was an audience.
Early on, Lynn noticed that Elena seeked more attention than the other children and tried to be center of attention.
We were always in competition with each other. It was always a competition. Who could be better? With piano, it was, who could be better? Who could win more awards? With ballet, it was, who could do how many pirouettes? Or it was just a constant battle between us for the attention.
And for Elena, one person's attention mattered more than anything else.
Elena had to have Mom's complete and total absolute attention.
And she usually got it.
She knew how to pull at my mother's heartstrings and just make my mother bend at her every whim.
It was a talent that would come in handy once Elena met 17-year-old Christina Brown in 2005. Born just 2 weeks after Elena, Christina had grown up in Washington, D.C., but where Elena's childhood had been filled with loving and supportive family, Christina's circumstances had been far different.
Chris had a kind of difficult upbringing. She wasn't living in a stable home. She didn't have the support that most young girls have.
In fact, most of the support Christina got wasn't from her family.
Christina was in foster care several times in the District of Columbia.
However, despite the differences in their backgrounds, the two teens bonded. In fact, they did more than that.
Elena had fallen in love with Christina Brown.
The relationship took Elena's parents by surprise.
She had flings with guys when she was 16. That was the first boyfriend. There were a couple other ones that were very short-lived.
Elena's mother, Lynn, was especially shocked to learn that her daughter had a girlfriend, but did her best to overcome it.
She was strict Catholic, but she thought she could help Christina, and she wanted to see Elena happy, so she was accepting.
In fact, Lynn did more than just accept Elena and Christina's relationship. When Christina turned 18 and aged out of foster care, Lynn welcomed Elena's girlfriend into the family's home.
She needed a safe and reliable home. Mom, being that nurturer, that caretaker, offered Christina a place to stay.
And that wasn't all Lynn ended up doing for her daughter's girlfriend.
She had such a big heart. She wanted to help her better herself, helping her through college, giving her a car to drive, helping her financially, letting her live in her house.
Over the next few years, Christina lived with Elena and the Mercers and took classes at a local community college.
They had their own bedroom, and they were being supported essentially by my wife.
Lynn catered to Elena. She always was trying to make her happy.
Although even with her mother's acceptance and support, there was plenty of drama in Elena's relationship with Christina.
They would break up and come back and break up and come back.
And in 2010, it looked as if their tempestuous 5-year relationship was finally over.
They broke up, and Elena decided to go date guys again.
Elena left Chris and basically stayed with a guy for 2 months until she was pregnant.
However, upon discovering that she was pregnant, Elena realized that she didn't want to stay with the baby's father and came rushing back to Christina. The couple moved back in with Elena's parents, and in November of 2010, Elena gave birth to a daughter, much to her mother's delight.
My mother was preparing and caring for this baby, and I think that's when my mother honestly was the happiest.
It would only be temporary, though. Elena, Christina, and the baby eventually moved out, got their own place in neighboring King George County, and started building a life for themselves.
Christina was employed by a rental car agency in King George, as well as a local hotel. She worked 2 different jobs.
And in 2012, the couple took another big step.
They were married in District of Columbia.
But even as Elena settled down with Christina, trouble was coming. A horrifying crime that would take her mother's life and put her daughter's future in jeopardy. Coming up, is Elena's mother the victim of a burglary gone bad?
It looked like somebody had gone through the house looking for something.
Or was it an abduction?
One of my first thoughts when I saw the kids' toys was a child.
Just before midnight on May 18, 2014, a sheriff's deputy conducting a routine welfare check discovered the body of Lynn Mercer, dead in her Spotsylvania County, Virginia home.
We found the victim laying on the living room floor with no signs of life. She had been shot.
But the 60-year-old nurse's dead body wasn't the only disturbing thing the first responders found.
The front living room had child toys around. One of my first thoughts when I saw the kids' toys was a child.
The police frantically searched the house, hoping the child was merely hiding and not another victim.
Closets under the bed, anywhere a person could be. We went through the whole house like that till we were confident the house was empty.
But did that mean that the child had been abducted, or had Lynn's killers been after something else?
The house had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out. Clothing was laying everywhere. It looked like somebody had gone through the house looking for something.
Was it possible Lynn inadvertently walked in on burglars while they were ransacking what they thought was an empty house?
Mom worked the same shifts at Washington Hospital Center for years. So she would go to work at 7, get home in the mornings.
And Lynn's husband, Bob, was temporarily living near his job just outside D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia.
Bob had just had back surgery, and he was living up north for convenience because he couldn't drive because of his back surgery.
So thinking the house was empty, it appeared that Lynn had come home from work on Saturday morning and walked into an ambush.
She was in the scrubs. All her belongings were around her. Looked like they just fell to the floor.
She had been shot a total of 4 times.
2 of the wounds were to her back.
One had passed through and her back and came out her chest, and the other one had gone through her lower torso and had passed through her legs.
That spun her around, and she fell on her back on the floor.
And then, while Lynn lay bleeding on the floor, the killer came closer.
The perpetrator came over top of her, fired 2 additional rounds into her upper torso.
However, despite 4 distinct bullet wounds in Lynn's body, the investigators could only find 3 shell casings at the crime scene.
We tore the house apart looking for that last casing. We weren't able to find it.
Which made us to believe that the gun had possibly jammed after the last shot.
And the fact that one was missing wasn't the only unusual thing about the shell casings either.
The shell casings were very specific. They were steel shell casings with red dots on the back.
In my 30 years, I've never run across them before.
In addition to the unusual steel shell casings, the investigators did recover all 4 of the bullets used in the crime. 2 were found in the living room.
1 bullet had lodged in a couch. We were able to recover that bullet. A second bullet was found in the corner.
And the 2 fired as the killer stood over Lynn had passed through her body and into the floorboards beneath her.
1 bullet had lodged in a 4 joist, and a 4th bullet was found underneath the home on the ground.
Between them, the bullets in the casings could help the investigators identify the murder weapon.
The ballistics evidence from the scene was sent for analysis.
But whose hand had wielded the gun? The neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything.
This house is very secluded. The nearest house was a couple hundred yards away. Most of the lots there are large lots, several acres in size.
The neighbors were all horrified by the news that Lynn was dead.
She was described as probably the perfect friend, everybody loved her.
Well, almost everyone. According to the neighbors, there were two people that Lynn didn't get along with.
Elena Mercer and Christina Brown's name came up immediately.
And the reason their names came up had to do with how Elena and Christina had met in the first place. Although a precocious child, Elena had also been temperamental.
Elena was, once she turned around 4, very volatile, very easy to anger, very vindictive.
She would throw violent temper tantrums.
Elena's parents put her in therapy, but their little girl's illness grew worse.
They essentially diagnosed her as bipolar. She was in and out of psychiatric hospitals.
Over the next several years, while Elena's father worked hard to support the struggling family, Elena's mother, Lynn, had done all that she could to support her daughter's battle with bipolar disorder.
She tried to get Elena the best care that she could. She fought with insurance over and over and over to make sure that she could have stays long enough to address the issues. If this one hospital wasn't working well enough, she would fight to get her transferred to another hospital.
And in 2005, when Elena was 17, Lynn had checked her into a special residential program for troubled teens.
Elena had a really bad fit, was committed again.
And that was where Christina came into the picture.
Elena and Chris had both suffered from mental illness and had both been institutionalized in a mental health facility, and that's where they met.
When they were discharged, Lynn had welcomed Elena's girlfriend into her home.
Lynn tried everything she could to make that child happy.
Lynn provided them with food, paid the utilities. At that time, Elena was drawing disability, Social Security, and Chris was working at a car wash. Together, they had an income of probably $1,800 a month. And that isn't bad for a couple that's living with no outside expenses.
However, according to the family, Elena and Christina had soon found something to spend their money on.
They were doing copious amounts of drugs.
They were using marijuana openly. They were using other drugs as well, but not just milk and weed.
And even with a baby to care for, Elena and Christina's drug use had continued.
The baby was maybe 6 months, and I had come over with my 2 young children, and I walk in, and the house just reeks of marijuana. I'm like, Mom, what the heck? And Mom's like, I told them to stop. I can't. What am I supposed to do? You know, I was like, call the cops.
But Lynn, as always, hesitated to anger Elena.
My sister honestly manipulated my mother and made her so fearful that she honestly probably felt like she had no choice.
And as the family explained to the investigators, Elena's temper wasn't the only one Lynn had to consider. According to Elena's father, Christina had a violent and criminal past.
She had been a drug runner for a drug ring in Washington, D.C.
Together, Christina's tough attitude and Elena's volatile nature had Lynn increasingly on edge.
They were threatening her, telling her they were going to push her down the stairs. Their threats became increasingly more violent.
And in June of 2012, the threats and intimidation escalated to the point that the police had gotten involved.
There was a big blow up at the house involving Christina and Miss Mercer and Melissa. It was a push and shoving match.
Chris got physical, and I called the police. Chris attacked me in front of the police officers, and the police had to drag Chris off of me.
Elena's girlfriend spent the night in jail.
Christina actually wound up being arrested for domestic assault.
After the incident, Lynn finally found the strength to kick her daughter and Christina out of the house.
They were evicted for the safety of my mother.
Lynn also took out a restraining order against Elena and Christina.
Lynn said she was scared to death.
After more than a year of tension and threat, Lynn was relieved to have Elena and Christina out of the house. But she also worried that her granddaughter wasn't growing up in the best environment.
They would do sort of long-term rentals in hotels, stay at one place for a month, move, stay at another hotel for a month, live on someone's couch for a while, move to another hotel, all the while dragging this child along with them.
In August of 2012, concerned over the child's safety, Lynn went to court and filed for temporary custody of the 20-month-old.
Lynn saw this situation as dangerous for the child because of the way they were living.
And when Lynn's custody case went to court that November, the judge had agreed with Lynn.
She went to court and was able to obtain custody of her granddaughter.
It was only temporary until Elena and Christina could get their lives in order.
They had to have an acceptable living situation for the child, and they had to be stable, overall stable.
Spurred on by the custody situation, Elena and Christina had gotten married in October of 2012 and moved into an apartment in neighboring King George County.
The apartment they had was the first stable housing they had had in maybe years, and it was all part of their efforts to get custody of this grandchild back.
But would it be enough to convince the court? Or had they decided on a more direct approach? Coming up, Elena appears surprised by news of her mother's death.
Elena was visibly upset. She did go to her knees.
And the investigators uncover a crucial piece of evidence.
As soon as I looked down, I saw the red dot. There it is.
By mid-morning of May 19, 2014, it had been less than 24 hours since sheriff's deputies found 60-year-old Lynn Mercer murdered in her Spotsylvania County, Virginia home.
It appeared that Miss Mercer had been ambushed. The perpetrator stepped out and shot her down, and then stepped over and shot 2 more rounds into her upper torso.
Lynn's family believed that her 25-year-old daughter, Elena, and Elena's wife, Christina Brown, were behind the murder.
Lynn and Elena and Christina had been locked in a long-running child custody battle over Elena's daughter.
At first, it had appeared that Elena might get her daughter back.
Christina and Elena had tried to stabilize their living situation in order to help them succeed in the custody case.
But in April of 2014, a month before her mother's murder, Elena's attempt to win custody of her 3-year-old daughter had suffered a serious setback.
In the days leading up to what was supposed to be the final custody hearing for these folks, Elena was arrested for prostitution.
It was hard on the family, learning the lengths that Elena would go to in order to feed her drug habit.
You always have a father's love for your children. At the same time, I'm looking at a person that I know is dysfunctional, entirely dysfunctional.
The judge agreed with her father's assessment too, and as a result, the custody hearing did not go well for Elena.
Elena lost the last circuit court appeal in April 2014, and Mom was killed in May of 2014.
That timing led the family to the horrifying conclusion that Elena and Christina had killed Lynn in order to get Elena's daughter back.
I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think possible that evil of them displayed our troubles. But, it was true.
We knew it was Elena in crisis because of all the issues that had gone on.
Or was it possible that after so many years of dealing with Elena's issues, that her family was jumping to conclusions? On the morning of May 19th, Spotsylvania County sheriffs knocked on the door of Elena and Christina's apartment in neighboring King George County.
We're plainclothes detectives, so we requested a uniformed deputy to respond with us. We were greeted by Christina and welcomed into the home.
And what they saw inside solved at least one mystery.
The detectives found that the child was okay and unharmed.
The child is happy, healthy, running around the house.
And according to Elena, they'd had her since Lynn went to work on Friday night.
They had visitations with her from Saturday until Monday morning at 10.
In fact, Elena said that when the investigators knocked on her door, she had been in the process of gathering her daughter's things.
Elena was supposed to be meeting back with her mother to return the child.
Contrary to what her family believed, was it possible Elena didn't know?
We, at that time, proceeded to sit down at the table and tell Elena that her mother had been killed. Elena was visibly upset. She did go to her knees. She made the sounds of somebody that was crying.
But Christina had a very different reaction.
People certainly handle information like this different. But Christina, the whole entire time we were there, had almost a smirk on her face.
Suspicious of Christina, the investigators asked if she or Elena had been anywhere near Lynn's house in the last few days.
The last time Elena and Christine said that they were there was in 2012.
They hadn't even been there to pick up or drop off Elena's 3-year-old.
The police station, just where all the exchanges were done.
They got video cameras there, so it would have been a safe place for her to drop her daughter off.
But if they hadn't been to Lynn's house, where had they been? Neither Elena nor Christina hesitated to answer.
They said that they had been home watching her child, watching movies, and they had gone up to D.C. to Christina's family the following day, roughly in the morning. So they basically had each other as an alibi.
Alibis that they were able to back up, too.
Sitting on the kitchen table, there was a stack of receipts, places that they had gone the day in question. And they had the dates and the times on them that they provided to us.
They even allowed the investigators to look through their cell phones.
Their phones were clean. There weren't very many messages. There weren't any pictures.
And there was that strange smirk on Christina's face when the investigators told her that Lynn was dead.
It was an unusual reaction given that Lynn was basically the mother to both of these folks.
And that left the investigators wondering if they could provoke Christina into a more telling reaction.
We asked Elena and Christina to come in to the sheriff's office to take a polygraph.
Both Elena and Christina agreed.
They were cooperative throughout the whole process.
But did that mean Christina had nothing to hide? Hoping to make her sweat a little, the investigators had Elena take the polygraph first.
I wasn't part of the interview, but we get to watch it.
And what they saw validated all the Mercer family's suspicions.
The polygrapher was looking through a two-way mirror, and you could tell from his eyes, it's like, geez.
Apparently, the test wasn't going well for Elena.
She showed deception in the polygraph process.
And after Elena failed the test, Christina refused to take it.
She said for everybody here, she goes, well, she failed, I'm going to fail.
The failed polygraph wasn't enough for an arrest, and they had to release both women.
A polygraph cannot be used against them in a court process.
We all gathered back up in the office after that, and the polygrapher looked at me and goes, you're on the right track. Just got to keep pushing.
Elena wasn't under arrest, but despite her mother's death, she wouldn't get to keep her dog either.
We filed an emergency custody hearing. I had to go and face my sister and Christina and essentially take custody of their child from them.
And considering the circumstances, it was a terrifying experience.
My sister, she was very angry. She told me, you will not get away with this. Immediately after the custody hearing, I went and filed a restraining order, which of course is only good for, a couple days.
Although before those few days were up, the investigators would get the break they needed. It started when a man from neighboring King George County called the Spotsylvania Crime Stoppers line.
We had a tip that came in from somebody in King George that sold Christina and Elena a gun.
According to the seller, the weapon was a 9mm pistol, the same caliber as the gun that killed Lynn. But that wasn't the only thing he told the investigators about the gun.
The gentleman who sold the gun said there was a problem with the weapon, that he could never fire more than 4 shots through it consecutively without causing the gun to jam. So if you fired that weapon 4 times, you would leave 4 bullets wherever you were shooting, 3 shell casings on the ground, and you would have a shell casing jammed in the gun when you left. Exactly consistent with the evidence in this case.
And thanks to the seller, the investigators might be able to prove that the gun he'd sold Elena and Christina was the same one that killed Elena's mother.
He told them that before he sold them the gun, he actually took the gun out in his backyard and test fired it. And from that, they were able to pick up casings.
And the casings weren't brass, they were steel.
As soon as I looked down, I saw the red dot. There it is.
We matched those cartridge cases back to the cartridge cases found at the scene.
Just to be sure, they sent the casings from the crime scene and the test firing to the state crime lab for ballistics testing.
The firearms section was able to compare those two sets of cartridge cases and conclude that they were fired from the same weapon.
And when the results came back on May 30th, the investigators went back to Elena and Christina's apartment with an arrest warrant.
We went out there in full force to find them.
But Elena and Christina were gone, and they had apparently left in a hurry.
The door was actually open. Keys, their phones, and everything were sitting on the table. So, well, they're close. They're somewhere close.
We feel that somebody must have alerted them when we turned into the subdivision.
And after 2 hours of door knocking, the investigators finally found the fugitive, hiding in a friend's house nearby.
Started getting a lot of finger pointing. That's where they were. When I confronted the homeowner, he basically opened the door and said, "Y'all come on out." And when they did, we took them to custody.
Coming up, will Elena finally reveal the truth?
She broke down and cried and told us what Christina had done.
Or is she lying to protect herself?
Christina told a story that was very similar except for one important detail.
On May 30th, 2014, Spotsylvania County, Virginia Sheriff's investigators placed Elena Mercer and Christina Brown under arrest for murder.
I heard they had ran from their apartment into another and apparently were hiding underneath the bed like the cowards they are.
The two 25-year-olds were suspects in the murder of Elena's mother, 60-year-old Lynn Mercer.
Lynn Mercer had previously obtained custody of her granddaughter, which was Elena's daughter.
Once in custody, both Elena and Christina refused to answer any more questions.
They both lawyered up, so there was no further speaking with them.
Indicted for murder, they were held without bond at the Spotsylvania County Jail.
They sat in jail for over a year and a half.
We were able to keep them apart the best that we could, being at the same facility, but it was important for us to be able to keep them apart.
Not only to keep Elena and Christina from colluding on a story, but also to drive a wedge between the couple, which, as the weeks and months wore on, appeared to be working.
We had information that Elena had several relationships with other females in the jail, and that Christina was upset about it.
But would it be enough to turn Christina and Elena against one another? As they prepped for trial, the prosecutors hoped that was the case.
Despite all the investigation that went on in this case, there was always one concern, and that was that we were never able to place any one person as the trigger woman in the case.
Technically, the prosecutors didn't have to prove whether Elena or Christina had pulled the trigger.
We specifically charged that they were either acting in concert with each other or that they each planned and took steps in furtherance of this in advance.
And the prosecutors were confident they could prove that much.
We were able to make a really compelling case because the forensics matched up so that we put the weapon that did the murder in the hands of the people who are alleged to have committed it.
But would that be enough for the jury? The prosecutor wasn't sure.
I spoke with the defense attorneys and I told them, look, my case is strong, but it could be stronger. I would like to know who the trigger woman is, and I will be happy to receive whichever one of you gets to my office first to tell me what happened.
Would it work? No promises were made. No deals offered.
Elena's attorney approached us and said she wanted to speak to us.
Detective Short and I went and met with her at the local jail. We spoke with Elena at length about what had happened.
And over the course of her statement, Elena not only tried to explain just what had happened, she also pointed out just who was to blame.
She broke down and cried and told us what Christina had done.
Elena said that in the time leading up to April of 2014, Christina had become frustrated with the ongoing custody case and started to voice threatening language towards Lynn.
Threats that Christina had eventually turned to reality, according to Elena.
Elena told us that Christina had made elaborate plans regarding killing Lynn.
She went into a few details that kind of matched up what we had on the crime scene.
Elena knew the details, but she also said that she had tried to talk Christina out of killing her mother.
Elena told us that she was initially not okay with the plan to kill her mother.
However, she claimed that her tougher, streetwise wife had eventually bullied her into going along.
It was always a dominant, submissive relationship. Chris was the dominant. Elena was very, very submissive to her.
Although as far as her part in the plan went, Elena said that on the day of the murder, all she did was stay with her daughter and establish Christina's alibi.
She executed the plan to hold both of their phones so that it appeared that they were both in King George County.
Everything else, according to Elena, was Christina's doing.
Elena said that Christina went out, was gone for an appropriate amount of time, and came back and just said, "It's done." I watched her take her last breath.
But was it the truth? Once Elena came forward, the prosecutor's office immediately passed that information along to Christina's attorney.
Immediately, Christina's lawyer said, "Hey, she wants to talk."
Christina and her attorney also spoke with Detective Shorten. During that debriefing, Christina told a story that was very similar to what Elena had said, except for one important detail, which was that Elena was the person who had shot her own mother.
She said she woke up one day, Elena wasn't there, and when she came home, she said it was done.
Other than the name of the shooter, the two stories were almost identical. Although Christina did add one new piece to the puzzle. What had become of the gun?
Christina's version of it was Elena came in and told her that she had tossed the gun.
Could the police finally recover the murder weapon?
We basically launched a huge search along 301, walking for about 8.5 miles side by side, looking for anything. And we did that within 10 hours of talking to Christina, and we didn't find anything.
The weapon was never located during our investigation.
Which meant that despite two confessions, the prosecutors were right back where they started. Coming up, tensions explode in the courtroom.
Ask if you both deserve a special place in hell.
But will Elena get the last word?
The people in the courtroom were horrified.
On June 2nd, 2016, Elena Mercer and Christina Brown stood in a Spotsylvania County, Virginia courtroom. The two 27-year-olds had spent the last 2 years in jail, awaiting trial for the murder of Lynn Mercer, Elena's mother, over the custody of Elena's daughter.
Frustration in the custody case ultimately became the seed that grew into the plot to kill Lynn Mercer.
However, the prosecution couldn't prove whether it was Elena or Christina who actually pulled the trigger.
They both implicated each other. There was no single piece of evidence that tipped me one way or the other as to who actually was the shooter.
And ultimately, no one would ever know, because Elena and Christina weren't in court to stand trial.
After consulting with the family, we made them a plea offer in the case.
The charge was first-degree murder, accessory before the fact.
Both Elena and Christina took the deal.
They admitted to having involvement, whether it was covering up or actually plotting it, the purchase of the weapon.
And as far as the prosecutors were concerned, that was good enough.
As long as we had a life sentence on the table, I would be able to argue sufficiently to get a sentence that was appropriate for that.
But what was appropriate? Elena's father didn't hold back when he spoke at the sentencing hearing.
I said, I know that you are my child. I hope that they give you a life sentence from this crime.
And Elena's half-sister Melissa agreed.
I want them to rot in jail. Whoever pulled the trigger, I don't care. They both planned it. They're both equally responsible.
Although for Elena's younger sister Elise, even life in prison wasn't enough.
I said, only God and law can judge you, and you both deserve a special place in hell.
When it was their turn to speak, Christina chose to remain silent, but not Elena.
My sister had some long, drawn-out statement how it is all my family's fault, and that she is simply the product of being raised in mental institutions.
The people in the courtroom were horrified.
Including the judge, who sentenced both Elena and Christina to 60 years in prison.
They're not going to get out of prison until they're in their late 70s, if they get out at all.
And according to her sister, it's what Elena deserves, not only for what she did to her mother, but for what she did to her daughter, too.
I had to tell her, well, baby, Grandma still loves you, but she can't come see you. And then I have to deal with the question, well, why isn't my mommy coming to pick me up?
Elena Mercer and Christina Brown eventually divorced. Elena's daughter is now in the custody of the child's father. The Mercer family retains visitation rights.
When a body is found floating in an idyllic Tennessee river, questions abound.
You start thinking, is it someone who's fishing maybe fell, hurt themselves? We had no idea who this was.
Is this a tragic accident or a deadly cover-up?
He had some blood around his mouth and his nose, and there was blood on the side of his head.
A nearby fire suggests someone went to great lengths to cover their tracks.
The car had already been engulfed in flames and consumed by fire. Nothing left of it. What was going through our minds was, are these two crimes related?
As the pieces fall into place, a tale of he said, she said threatens to derail the investigation. No one could ever imagine the twisted path that would lead detectives to a killer.
This was very intentional, and they wanted him to die.
They said, if you don't help me, you're next.
February 2nd, 2011, Sequatchie County, Tennessee. It's just after 8 a.m. in this rural community outside of Chattanooga as Detective Jody Lockhart settles in for the day.
We're sitting around talking. We're trying to get a game plan what we're going to do for the day. And then we get a call.
Sequatchie County 911, what's the problem? Well, ma'am, I was walking St. Jensen. I think I've seen a body float. I'm not sure. So, well, I just heard out running.
Detective Lockhart immediately rushes to the riverfront, 9 miles away from the sheriff's office.
At that point, we don't know how he got there or why he was there. We start thinking, is it someone who's fishing maybe fell, hurt themselves, somebody who maybe got drunk and fell?
The scene itself looked like people would go there and drink. There were beer cans and debris at the scene.
Pickens Bridge is the area that we were called to. It's on the south end of our county. A lot of kids and adults like to party down there just because it's out of the way. It's in a rural spot.
When detectives reach the river's edge, they're met with a disturbing sight.
You have to walk down. It's a muddy, slippery track. We start walking down into there, and you get down to where you start seeing the crest of the water, and at that point in time, you can see the body. The body was not a small guy. He was a larger male. We go ahead and we back off. We rope the scene off to make sure no one else can get in. We're trying to figure out who the body is. How did he get here? We're just running anything you can think of through your head.
You have a body in the water. Is it suicide? Is it an accident? Or is it a homicide?
Detectives decide they need all hands on deck and call in for help from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
I remember receiving a call from Detective Lockhart who advised that they discovered a body in the river on the Pickett's Bridge. I immediately responded to the area. When I arrived at the scene, they had the end of the road blocked off with crime scene tape. Several Sheriff's Department vehicles were already present on the scene.
Officers wade into the cold, wintry water and pull the body to shore.
We go into the water. It's probably about waist deep water. As I first started walking up, I noticed the white male who was wearing blue jeans, an orange shirt, and had some suspenders on. He was face up. He had one hand in the water. His boots were out of the water.
I've seen bodies in water that have been in much worse shape. I think what helped in this instance was the water was cold, and I think that helped preserve the body.
When they bring the body to shore, detectives and medical examiners begin a more thorough inspection.
Sometimes the officers in the community, they're familiar with a lot of the local folks. They can identify who they are immediately once we arrive on the scene. But this wasn't the case in this investigation. We had no idea who this gentleman was.
He looked like your typical white male that had been in the river for a good 12 hours. He was the gray color that you normally see. Your body changes. You lose all pigment of your skin. When the blood pulls away from you, you get like an ashy gray color.
He had blood on the side of his head. There was blood around his mouth or nose, but we didn't know he'd been struck with an object. There were no other visible wounds to him. The remains were placed in a body bag, and he's transported to Nashville for an autopsy.
While they await the results of the autopsy, detectives search the surrounding area, hoping for clues to the victim's identity.
We found blood between the tree line and the mud. We collected the tire impressions where a car looked like it had parked at where the blood would have been at.
Investigators also discovered 2 sets of footprints and a trail leading to the river's edge.
We found what appeared to be like a heel of a boot being dragged all the way down. It was just a solid straight line that would skip every now and then, as if you were dragging something heavy all the way there to the water.
You know that this guy didn't drag himself and put himself in the water.
Drag marks would eliminate a suicide. We also felt it would eliminate an accidental death. So it did appear fairly quickly that this was the result of foul play of some sort. There's just speculation as to what might have happened. One of the things we talked about was there a fight at the scene, people out there drinking or doing something, and a fight ensued and the victim was killed. You're trying to keep your mind open to any possibility as to what it might be.
After processing the scene, detectives turn to the 911 caller, Larry Eggert.
You have times when the 911 caller is actually the perpetrator, so we have to rule out everyone from being a suspect in this case.
Eggert tells detectives he was in the area hoping to make a little money.
Mr. Eggert was aware that people would go down there and party, and they usually don't clean up their beer cans. He would collect aluminum cans to take to the recycling center, and they would pay him.
As police continue questioning Eggert, he remains cooperative. That is, until police ask him to show them where he first spotted the body.
He didn't want to go back nowhere near the river at all. Of course, we didn't make him. We kept him away. He just described everything he saw, and he was visibly shaken up. You could tell that seeing the body bothered him.
To determine if he is involved in the crime, detectives compare Eggert's shoes to the footprints discovered near the river's edge.
We took foot impressions from him at the scene, and he was ruled out as a potential suspect.
There was no indication that Mr. Eggert was anything other than the fellow who found the body.
After we got through working the crime scene, we go back to our office to try to strategize and think about how we can identify who he is. We want to alert the news media.
As detectives discuss their next move, they receive more troubling news.
We had a deputy who came down the hall and mentioned that there was a fire scene that he worked involving a vehicle.
We thought that it was kind of odd that we had a car burning at the same time. There's a body in the river.
Coming up, out of the ashes comes a crucial clue that will kick this investigation into high gear.
The owner of the residence that was close heard explosions.
By the grace of God, he recovered a handicap placard from that scene.
Started noticing he looked a lot like the gentleman that we found in the river.
Detectives in Sequatchie County, Tennessee, are learning the details of a mysterious fire that seems to have occurred just hours before they fished an unknown man out of the river.
This occurred on the north end of our county, kind of a remote area where the car was at. Very secluded, not many people around. The owner of the residence that was close heard explosions. He called the dispatch center sent an officer out there.
By the time officers arrived to the scene, the vehicle was a total loss.
The car had already been pretty much engulfed in flames and consumed by fire. Nothing left of it. Couldn't tell what it was.
We had a vehicle that had been torched, and then we have a body in the river on the same day.
It is not atypical for criminals to burn a car in an effort to conceal evidence.
What was going through our minds was, are these two crimes related?
While the car was completely destroyed in the fire, officers were able to salvage one key piece of evidence.
By the grace of God, he had recovered a handicap placard from that scene.
He found the handicap tag that was partially burnt, and he brought it back to the office so we could maybe investigate that crime. We took the handicap tag, we ran the numbers through the DMV.
The tag is registered to a 1996 Monte Carlo, owned by an area resident.
It led us to the name of Clifford Carter.
At that time, we didn't know who Clifford Carden was or who our body was. We went ahead and pulled up a driver's license picture of him. Started noticing he looked a lot like the gentleman that we found in the river.
From an early age, Clifford M. Carden Jr. loved two things: family and cars.
My father was a mechanic for 30 plus years of his life, and he was into cars.
Dad was a big NASCAR guy. That's what he loved. You couldn't drag him away if you had to.
It was crazy, and all of the memorabilia that he had collected of Dale Earnhardt and Dale Earnhardt Jr. knives, watches, cards. If it had Dale Earnhardt on it, my father had purchased it.
Besides cars and racing, Cliff's other passion in life was his family. Even though his first marriage ended in divorce, the doting father still remained actively involved with his children, Chris and Sandora.
When they divorced, he just moved right across the street. So coming home from school, he would be there. If I had a ball game that day, everybody went. That's just the way my childhood was with my dad and my mom.
Then, in 1988, at age 32, Cliff decided to give love another shot when he met 27-year-old Cindy Tapley.
We got married on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1991. I fell in love with him because he was so kind and so gentle. He was just an awesome person.
When my dad and Cindy were together, he took care of her to the best of his ability. He would provide and do what he had to provide.
I already had 2 children, and he played with my kids. I mean, it was just like whatever was in my house that belonged to me, he accepted it right away. He was just my big teddy bear.
Though he'd always enjoyed life, by the time Cliff was 50, issues with his weight had begun to have a detrimental impact on his day-to-day activities.
My dad, he's right at 350, 375 pounds. He needed to lose weight.
My father struggled with diabetes. He was a heart patient, neuropathy in the hands and feet. His health issues were really bad. That's where my stepmom, Cindy, had stepped in to help take care of him.
But Cliff's health wasn't the only thing in his life going downhill. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, he and Cindy separated, leaving Cliff to live alone in his trailer.
He was not coming home until like 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. My son and his wife came with a U-Haul and made 2 loads, and I moved. I just took what was mine.
Dad hated being single. He needed a companion.
My father's trailer looked like somebody had taken a 16 by 80 trailer and dropped it right in the middle of a tomato field. His nearest neighbor was a mile and a half down the road, and Daddy was afraid to be alone. So he would drive off the mountain every day to find something to do, to keep himself busy.
But on February 3rd, 2011, it seems Cliff had gone out and never returned.
Right before Christmas, we started talking again. We were discussing me coming back home. He said, I want us to work. But I kept trying to call him, and there was no answer.
My stepmother could not get in touch with my father on the phone. She had called and left message after message and got the feeling something was wrong. So she calls me and wants to know if I had heard from my father.
Sandy, I said, your daddy's not home, and it's not like him to leave our Gizmo, which is our dog, outside.
A chill runs down Sandora's spine as she tells her stepmother she has not spoken to her father in days.
We usually talked about at least 3 or 4 times a week, but I had not heard from him. I hung up with her and started calling around the places where I knew he was at or people he might have been with, and could not reach my father.
24 long hours passed with no word from Cliff.
There was so much going through my head at that point in time of what had happened.
It was just such an uneasy feeling because it's not like him not to communicate. I went through every hospital in the parking lot to see if I could see his little red car because he'd had a heart attack before. So I thought, well, maybe he's at the hospital.
Then Cindy gets a call that changes everything.
I get a phone call from the TBI. He says, does your husband have any identification marks on his body? And I said, yeah, he's got tattoos on his arm, and I described the tattoos, and he goes, we found your husband. I said, is he okay? And he said he was dead. It was like my heart was broke. Then all of a sudden I got numb, you know.
Got a phone call, and I don't even remember who it was that called. I set the phone down. I turned to my wife, Marlene, and said, Dad's dead. They found him. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to his house.
At first, I didn't believe it, but then I had talked to my brother on the phone, and he was on his way to come get me. We were going to go find out.
A witness comes forward with key information about a suspect.
He had a lady with him. I'd never seen her.
Was she shorter, younger?
Had straight feet, black hair. Maybe shorter than that.
They had some mud on their shoes, and that they were in a fast pace to get away from that area.
Less than 24 hours after his body was pulled from Tennessee's Sequatchie River, police are now trying to figure out what happened to 55-year-old Cliff Carden.
We were still waiting back to hear from the medical examiners on the autopsy to find out the cause of death.
To find out more, detectives initiate a search of Cliff's residence. As they begin to work, Cliff's son Chris arrives at the home and immediately notices something out of place.
Dale Earnhardt 118 scale porcelain car. It was one of Dad's prized possessions as far as his collection goes, and I noticed immediately that it was missing.
Other valuable items from Cliff's memorabilia collection are also missing.
There was no signs of forced entry, but there had been items removed.
You could tell the house was disarrayed. There was stuff on the floor. Someone had went through it like they were looking for something.
To detectives, the condition of the home suggests Cliff was robbed by someone he knew. But as police continue to search the home, they make a sinister discovery.
There was a gas propane tank laid against the furnace heater area. In my opinion, that was set to try to burn the house down after someone had went through and tried to steal what they needed out of the house.
While police still don't know who is responsible for Cliff's death, others are beginning to have their suspicions.
Given how people were acting, what had taken place, I immediately thought Cindy's involved in this. She has to be.
Cliff Carter's estranged wife, Cindy Carter, did not live at the house with Cliff. They'd been separated for approximately 11 months.
Though Chris doesn't have any proof their stepmother is involved in their father's death, police take his concerns seriously.
I do remember being asked, do you think your stepmom has something to do with this? They were looking at her, but of course they said the partner would be the first one they look at. It made me feel like she has something to do with it, that it was her.
At this point in time, we hadn't ruled everybody out as being a potential suspect in this case. You look at family members of the estranged wife, everybody's a suspect.
As detectives finish up with Cliff's children, Cindy arrives on the scene.
The police called and told me to come up to the house. So I went to the home and they were investigating the scene.
We interviewed Mr. Carter's wife, Cindy, and she was very helpful to us. She cooperated with every bit of the investigation we had. She said they've not been together for a while. She was visibly upset.
I was the last one that had verbally talked to him. I was in college to get my bachelor's degree, and I had a problem with a paper that I wanted him to kind of help me understand. I kept trying to call him every 30 minutes.
Cindy Carter told the officers where she was during the applicable time frame, and they were able to verify that her alibi was in fact valid. She was never seriously looked at as a suspect.
With Cindy cleared, detectives begin looking into other possible leads.
The following morning, the very first thing we want to do is we want to call the medical examiner's office in Nashville.
The medical examiner, as part of the autopsy, did toxicology, and the toxicology on Cliff was all negative. He had nothing in his system.
But the autopsy does reveal a crucial piece of information: the exact cause of Cliff's death.
They let us know right off the bat he did have a single gunshot wound to the head. The shot ended up being right around the right side of the ear.
The medical examiner felt that the gun was 3 inches to 2 to 3 feet from Mr. Carden's head when it was discharged. And a bullet was recovered from the head of Mr. Carden.
They told us it was going to be a small to medium-sized caliber weapon, and they thought it to either be a 9mm or 38 caliber.
With the autopsy complete, police release information about the crime and their victim to area media outlets, hoping to drum up some tips.
After that, we started trying to retrace Cliff Carden's steps up until the point he died. We tried to figure out who he's been with, where he's been at, but as far as the shirt he had on.
Detectives work quickly to bring bar owner Sabra Roddy in for questioning.
Cliff, he came to my place 4 or 5 times a week.
So you never seen him have any kind of disturbances or arguments with anybody at your establishment?
No, I know that.
According to Sabra, Cliff was in the bar the day before his body was found.
He came in at his usual time, which is 5, 6 o'clock, and he had a lady with him. I'd never seen her before.
What did she look like? Was she older, younger?
probably 5'3", 5'4", had straight, big black hair, a little bit shorter than mine, probably shoulder length. And she was dressed for us, for my place.
She would not make eye contact, and she kept going to the bathroom frequently. Where even though I was taking care of other customers, I noticed it.
Sabra tells detectives that Cliff and the woman stayed at the bar into the evening before leaving together.
They left my place somewhere between 9 and 10. I did not know where they were going.
Could this mystery woman possibly be involved in Cliff's death? As detectives search for the unidentified female, Cliff's murder continues to make headlines.
This was a homicide. We don't have a lot of homicides, so there was some tension in the community, and there was media coverage.
The media frenzy pays off on February 8th, when resident Randy Griffith calls the police tip line with a possible lead after seeing the story on local news.
Mr. Griffith called in. He didn't know if it was part of the investigation or not, but thought that we might want to know about it.
Randy tells investigators he had run into a friend of his on the night of February 2nd, not far from where Clifford Cardin's burned-out car was discovered.
He talks to us about how he had picked up Brian Bettis and a female walking. He didn't know who the female was, but he knew Brian. Randy Griffith said Brian was acting kind of odd, kind of skittish, kind of worried that something was going on.
That's not all Randy thought was unusual.
Mr. Griffith noticed that they had some mud on their shoes and that they were in a fast pace to get away from that area. They asked him to give him a ride to the local hotel. So Mr. Griffith takes him to Mountain Inn Suites, drops him off there.
After a quick run inside, Randy says Brian made one final request.
He asked, hey, can you run us to Walmart? We need to buy a few things. He takes Brian and the female to the Walmart. That's the last time Randy has ever seen him.
Coming up, police catch a glimpse of the woman at the center of this mystery.
They're in Mr. Card's car, and they're carrying in Dale and memorabilia.
And a shocking allegation leaves investigators speechless.
He says you got all things that made a whole excuse for her, so yeah.
It's been nearly a week since Cliff Cardin's murder, and detectives in Sequatchie County, Tennessee now have two key suspects. 34-year-old Brian Bettis and an unknown female. The pair was last seen at an area Walmart on the night of Cliff's death.
We learned that information from Randy, which gave us suspects. And from there, the detectives got the video from Walmart.
Using their informant's description of the couple, it doesn't take long for detectives to hit pay dirt.
You can see them on the surveillance video. They buy some clothing. They buy blue jeans and shoes for Brian.
Hoping to ID the woman accompanying Brian, detectives head to the hotel where they believe the couple may have stayed on the night of the murder. Once again, detectives pull surveillance footage from February 2nd, this time from the Mountain Inn Suites, and begin looking for their mystery woman.
This is another piece of the puzzle, basically. And of course, that puzzle comes together when they see the video from the Mountain Inn Suites.
Hours before it was burned, detectives spot Cliff's car and the couple on security footage.
They're in Mr. Card's car, and they're carrying in Dale Earnhardt memorabilia.
They're on video, having a good time, smiling. You can see them coming back to the hotel and unloading some of the items that they stole from the house.
That's a damning piece of evidence.
Though they've already checked out of the hotel, police are hopeful the couple may have left something behind.
They had already cleaned the room, but we found out that Mountain Inn Suites keeps a lock on their dumpster so no one else can throw garbage there. At which point we received the key and consent. We started going through the dumpster. We laid a tarp out. We brought every piece of garbage out of the dumpster. We found what we believe to be the garbage from their room.
It doesn't take long for the search to pay off.
We found all of the Walmart receipts and bags and stuff. We found a pill bottle with the last name Carton on it and had a bloody fingerprint.
At that point, we had enough evidence to bring charges.
With this new evidence, detectives need to track down Brian immediately. But he finds them first.
Brian ended up turning himself into us. I think he wanted his version put out first. I knew of Brian. I've dealt with him before on different calls prior to this. And Brian, he didn't look like his normal self. He looked like he had something troubling him.
According to Brian, he had never seen Cliff Carden before.
I never met her in my life until that night. She's known him for a time.
She is his girlfriend, 35-year-old Susan Baker. Growing up in Harris County, Texas, Susan Baker thrived.
My mom was a normal kid, went to school, had friends, went to beaches, things like that.
She did good in school, I know that, and she was a dancer after school in the flag team.
But complications from childhood kidney issues soon led Susan down a dark road.
My mom's pathway to addiction started out as painkillers. They were the only thing that relieved that pain.
Though Susan struggled with chronic pain and addiction, the birth of her children, Justice and Autumn, gave her purpose.
We were always close. She woke me up for school, made sure I got ready, made sure I was fed. She provided everything I needed.
I felt like she was my number one best friend. I just felt like I could talk to her about anything that was going on in my life, and she would help me through it.
Single parenting was tough, but in 2009, Susan found comfort in the arms of 33-year-old Brian Bettis. While Brian's affection may have been good for Susan's soul, it wasn't good for her addiction.
She always had a pill addiction, but she was never abusing it too much until she met Brian, and then it got worse. She stopped for a while, and she met him, and they started doing pills together.
But now, seated across from Brian in an interrogation room, detectives want to know how exactly Cliff Carden fit into this picture.
Being in a local bar, hanging out there is where he met Susan Baker.
We found out she was using Cliff for money and pills. She was actually in love with Brian. It started coming around that Cliff Carden may have been selling some of his medication.
She started because he didn't get wrong. And you get possessed.
Brian says the relationship started about a year ago.
I had met Susan when they first began dating. She would basically show him attention, and he would give her anything that she wanted. My father was lonely and did not want to be by himself, so he would settle for whatever.
Dad just needed somebody to talk to. That's the only thing Dad ever wanted. That's all he ever needed.
According to Brian, on the day of the shooting, Susan called him with a plan to rob Cliff.
He explained to us that they're going to rob him of his pills and his money.
Just one time that I was planning to do something to him, I didn't want to do nothing. I said, I just messed that. She just called me and asked me if I was going to get back some money quick.
Brian says that later that day, Susan and Cliff picked him up from an auto parts store, and she set the plan in motion.
She's always told me that he already killed me. I didn't see.
Cliff was driving when Susan is trying to take money from Cliff, and Brian states that Cliff didn't go along with the robbery. Starts, trying to fight back. Susan reaches her into the seat, displays a gun, and shoots him.
Bettis tells detectives that he had no idea Susan intended to shoot Cliff, and after pulling the trigger, she turned the gun on him next.
After she shot him, she looked at me. I was scared. You know what I mean? I just wanted to make sure I had that far from me.
She said, if you don't help me, you're next. And Brian Bettis' explanation to law enforcement was that he was scared and had to go along with this because she threatened him.
She had about time. She could pull out and jump over the spruce. She didn't hang up.
From there, Baker and Bettis moved the body out from the driver's side and drove to Pickett's Bridge, where Baker and Bettis pulled Mr. Carden out of the car, pulled him into the river, and left him there.
Then they drive the car out to Cliff Carden's house, and they steal from his house.
Finally, the two shacked up in the Mountain Inn suites for the night.
Did y'all go back to the hotel room? Have a plane in the sack?
Yeah. That it might have runs to that.
Major Hornet shoots the hide inside the head and kill him.
Yeah.
It was disturbing.
Detectives have to consider the possibility that Brian is lying to them.
They'll hear that from folks. They'll blame it on the other person. We were just waiting to hear her side of the story.
Coming up, Susan Baker has her own story to tell.
You shot him? Who shot him?
First time I've ever heard anyone react to the murder scene to it.
It was a hard situation. You don't really believe it at first.
Following his interview with Tennessee authorities on February 8, 2011, 34-year-old Brian Bettis is arrested for the murder of 55-year-old Cliff Carden. However, Bettis maintains that his girlfriend, 35-year-old Susan Baker, is the real person responsible for the murder.
During the interview, Brian Bettis advises that Susan has a friend that she may be at in Chattanooga.
Around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, we hooked up with Saudi Daisy officers and Hamilton County officers and went to the residence.
She did not resist in any way.
She seemed like she was just in the house, just hanging out, waiting on police to come get her.
Detectives place Susan under arrest and escort her back to the Sequatchie County Justice Center for questioning.
Tell us when you met.
It's been over a year ago.
And what kind of relationship did you have?
We had a pretty good relationship. He was not a man. He paid attention to me.
Susan Baker said Clifford Carden was the first man to be good to her, took her to Gatlinburg, took her to Daytona.
According to Susan, Cliff also provided something else for her: easy access to pills.
What would he give you? What kind of
Oxycodone.
Like Brian's account, Susan says on the day of the murder, the plan was simply to rob Cliff, not hurt him.
That day, basically rob his bill and get his money and be done with it. Never hurt him, never did nothing like that.
But one vital detail of her account is significantly different from Brian's.
Cliff started being real smart ass. He ran my arm and he told me he was going to kill me. And Brian was sitting right there, but he heard him.
What?
Shot.
You shot him? Who shot him?
Susan Baker told the officers that Brian Bettis was the shooter.
As detectives recount Brian's statement, Susan does an about-face.
I slept. I slept. I didn't look at him, but I done it. I didn't even know. You can not sit here or black and white or nothing. All nothing to talk. Even they know what I said, I didn't like her.
During the interview, Susan offers to reenact the shooting. She asked me to pull my seat up next to her as if I was driving.
Grab your arm and my arm, just like this, like that. Just like that. I didn't look, I didn't say.
In the interview, I'm kind of taken back by it. First time I've ever had anyone react the murder scene to me.
In addition to her startling confession, Susan also admits to disposing of Cliff's body, robbing his house, and burning his cars.
We charged Baker and Bettis with felony murder because they killed him in the perpetration of a robbery. And they were charged with destruction of personal property for burning the car.
My sister was the one that called me and told me. She called and told me, she said, hey, they got Susan. I said, great.
When I did find out it was my mom, this was a hard situation. You don't really believe it at first.
As trial dates for the couple loom, Brian Bettis makes a calculated decision.
He pled and received a 35-year sentence. He was just as guilty as Susan because he was part of the crime. Our feeling was that Bettis had no idea she was going to shoot him, and we took that into account and talked to the family and reached this agreement.
Susan Baker elects to take a different route.
Her attorneys felt that she should be evaluated just to make sure she was competent and did not meet the insanity standards. A clinical psychologist testified that her continued drug use was affecting her ability to be competent to participate in the process.
Years pass, and Susan remains under doctor's care while her trial is postponed indefinitely.
They kept postponing everything. They kept trying to say that she should be held accountable for her actions, and it was so frustrating that it got almost unbearable.
The psychologist continued to work with her and then came back at some point and said she was competent to proceed to trial.
Finally, in March of 2014, 3 years after Cliff's murder, the trial begins. Through an abundance of evidence, prosecutors lay out the motive for the shooting.
They had basically killed him to rob him. I don't think this was a result of a mental illness. I think this was a result of she wanted money and she wanted the pills and she was willing to kill to get him.
We testified. We went through all the videos. We watched her whole interview. The jury got to see every bit of evidence we had against both of them.
Faced with an overwhelming amount of evidence against their client, Susan's lawyers make a case that she should not be convicted of felony murder.
The argument was from the defense that she was guilty of reckless homicide, and basically what they argued was that the robbery was an afterthought. It really wasn't felony murder. It was a theft occurring after the man had died.
After several days of testimony, Susan Baker is found guilty of felony murder, aggravated robbery, and setting fire to personal property.
It only took them 15 minutes to convict her. 15 minutes.
If you're convicted of felony murder in Tennessee, it is an automatic life sentence. Susan Baker will not be parole eligible until she has served 51 calendar years.
My mom hates that she chose the path that she did, and she's just facing the consequences. That's all she can really do.
For Cliff's children, the verdict proves little relief from the pain they continue to experience from losing their father.
He did not deserve this. By no means, he did not deserve this.
My dad was a loving, caring father. No, loving and caring grandfather. That's Clifford Carter.
He was the kindest, most gentle person. And I want people to remember that. How much he loved everyone.
Susan Baker is currently serving her sentence at Deborah P. Johnson Rehabilitation Center. Susan will not be eligible for parole until 2064. She will be 89 years old. Hi, Sound listeners. We are bringing you a special bonus episode today from Oxygen's hit series, Buried in the Backyard. You can watch full episodes on demand on the free Oxygen app or on Peacock by clicking the link in our description. Enjoy. A successful tech entrepreneur vanishes from a popular Florida beach town.
You looking at me? It was extremely unlikely that he would just leave town without an explanation. Everybody's looking for him, and this is weird.
Police discover his search for a new life may have taken him down a dark path.
He just kind of fell into a gutter punk circle of friends pretty easily.
Donald was living the Florida lifestyle. He didn't have a job, but he had a fat bank account. And he would hang out with his kids. And somebody was siphoning off money, over $20,000. Who are these kids? What is the connection?
At his house, there was an alarming amount of blood.
And an investigation leads detectives to a horrifying discovery.
There was a freezer that was used as a coffin. Now we've gone to a homicide investigation.
Melbourne, Florida is a surfer's paradise. A funky beach town with an active arts community that's shared by college students and cutting-edge tech entrepreneurs. It's at the center of Florida's Space Coast.
Brevard County is a mix of towns. You have the tourist area of Cocoa Beach, you have the Kennedy Space Center, and then you have Melbourne, which is right off of the Indian River.
I moved to Melbourne because it was low-key, but it is a small town, a wonderful place to raise my family, to have my kids, feel safe. You hear all these bad stories about Chicago and New York City. We don't have any of that here.
But on this October afternoon, that reassuring sense of tranquility is shaken when authorities descend on the backyard of a property in the town of Canaveral Groves, just outside of Melbourne.
Canaveral Groves was a pretty rural community, pretty quiet. It's a place where you would find endless orange groves.
The police are following a lead in the search for a missing man.
We made a request to the sheriff's office to provide their helicopter for a flyover of the scene. They spotted one very small area. Their equipment had picked up just a real minor variation in temperature of dirt right there.
232 just got a 4001.
We discovered within about 8 inches of the surface a corner of something that was consistent with that chest freezer.
Once we had broke the soil area around the lid of the freezer, there was a distinct odor of decomposition. It's a smell that you never forget.
In order to preserve the integrity of anything in that freezer, what we want to do is transport that freezer to the medical examiner's office.
Fire department got involved because they were able to use the jaws of life and other tools to cut away the meat freezer, exposing the skeletal remains of a human being. The victim was badly decomposed. The body was encased in sleeping bags and bound with telephone cord at the legs. The hands were handcuffed behind the back. The body was positioned kind of on their side into the meat freezer so it would fit. And now we need to determine who buried the body in the backyard.
In Melbourne, you take people as they are. You're not like, oh, you don't dress right, so you can't hang out with us.
In the late 1990s,
Melbourne, Florida is home to a scrappy crew of skateboarders.
For kids our age, you were usually preppy, a surfer, or a skater. Preppy kids hung out at the mall, surfers hung out on the beach, and skaters sat on the gutter and watched each other pull skate tricks.
When they aren't skating, the tight-knit group of friends is often found hanging out at their favorite coffee joint, the Sun Shop Cafe.
That's where everybody went. If you were bored, you went to the Sun Shop just to see what was going on. And I was working there.
We spent all day at the coffee shop. And one day, Donald showed up.
Donald was a little older than us. He had cargo pants, a hip pack. He would come in, he would make little like quips and jokes about things, and we just thought he was hilarious.
42-year-old businessman Donald O'Sullivan strikes up a friendship with the crew of young skateboarders.
Everyone called him D. No one called him Donald. He was super nice, and he just kind of fell into our gutter punk circle of friends pretty easily.
A successful tech entrepreneur, Donald spends his days scoping out potential business ventures with his brother Dennis.
D had made some money and sort of retired early by building some computer company.
In the mid-1990s, he developed NetCentric Corp, the software company that would actually work with innovating faxes for business.
While Donald's professional life has been a success, he's had his share of personal hardship, including bouts of depression.
When I first met Dee, he was struggling with some depression. He was struggling with anxiety.
Donald was dealing with a number of issues. The company that he had co-founded was bought out. And then all of a sudden, it's gone.
Donald was from Atlanta, Georgia. He wanted to just get out.
He decided to come down to Florida to restart his life.
You're a dirty skater kid, but he really was fun. And I think it was like, hey, these kids keep me young or keeping my mind off of whatever turmoil he was dealing with. So at Shacktown, which was the skater house that we lived in, Donald just loved coming over and hanging out there.
Hey, Bono.
I would see Donald at least 3 to 4 times a week between Sun Shop and Shacktown.
In late September 1998, the kids in the skateboard crew noticed that their friend Dee hasn't been around lately.
That's when we started to question, well, when's the last time you saw D? Well, when's the last time you saw D? And everybody realized they hadn't seen him.
His brother Dennis grows worried when Donald's phone goes unanswered for weeks and his home appears deserted. Concerned that Donald may be suffering another bout of depression and could be in crisis, Dennis contacts the police.
You're dealing with an adult man. He had a manic depressive diagnosis at some point, and he would go black from time to time, go off the radar. He had the money to do just that.
If we have extenuating circumstances like depression or any kind of mental health issues, we check with the local mental health facilities in Melbourne. But if nobody's heard from them for several weeks, we're going to start checking bank records.
And officers' concerns grow when they discover substantial unexpected withdrawals from Donald's account.
Donald's bank records indicate some suspicious activity. Somebody was siphoning off money, over $20,000.
Wondering if the unusual withdrawal could be connected to Donald's manic depression, detectives head to the bank to get more information. And what they learn is troubling.
The bank employee said that a younger male had been attempting several times to cash checks on Donald O'Sullivan's account. That's something to be very alarmed about.
The representative says, we've had someone coming in and saying he's the son of Donald.
We weren't comfortable around police or interactions with police officers or us getting in trouble.
It's been days since anyone has heard from Florida businessman Donald O'Sullivan. His bank reports someone has been trying to access his account, and it's not Donald.
If you have a missing person and you have continued either activity or attempted activity on your accounts, that's something to be very alarmed about. The information we got from the bank was that a younger male had been attempting several times to cash checks on Donald O'Sullivan's account.
The representative says, look, we've had someone coming in and saying that his name is Michael O'Sullivan. He's the son of Donald.
He explained that the signature on the account does not match Donald's signature.
Then police go back to the family and they find out there is no Michael O'Sullivan. There is no son.
So whoever's identifying himself as Donald's son is lying about their identity, which worried us. Do we have a criminal event involved in this missing person event?
Concern grows when the missing man's brother Dennis informs police he's received a disturbing call.
The phone call came from a little P.O. box shop that dealt with mail. Someone was picking up Donald's mail. But it wasn't Donald.
The owner of the business had almost daily contact with Donald, and she was very suspicious of a young man who came in and explained that Donald was out of town and that he would be picking up Donald's mail.
The information raises detectives' eyebrows. Who is the young man, and could he be the same person attempting withdrawals from Donald's bank account? When Dennis tells the investigators that his brother Donald has been hanging out with a crew of young skateboarders, they can't ignore the possible connection.
Donald was living the Florida lifestyle. He didn't have a job, but he had a fat bank account. And he would hang out with his kids. He's in his early 40s and they're in their 20s. Who are these kids? What is the connection? Is it drugs? Is it something more nefarious?
There's a possibility that somebody who presented themselves as Donald's close friend could actually be involved.
Police head to the Sun Shop Cafe to question these unlikely friends.
We weren't comfortable around police or interactions with police officers or us getting in trouble for skating. But I was concerned that because we were skater kids, they were going to ignore all of us and just not pay attention to anything that we had to say.
The skaters insist none of them have access to Donald's bank account or his mail.
They informed us that it was extremely unlikely to them that he would just leave town without an explanation. They were worried about his whereabouts.
He was the nicest, most relatable adult that I felt like I knew. He was a grown-up that didn't tell you you're not doing what you're supposed to, study harder, where's your ambition. He wanted to help you get there. And I was nervous Dee's missing and we can't find Dee. You're really starting to worry something was wrong.
The detectives can find no apparent connection between the skateboard crew and Donald's disappearance. They learn that Donald owns a house on Lincoln Avenue in Melbourne, so they head there to see if it contains any clues that might lead to him.
During our initial scan of the exterior, we found a trash can which had a Quikrete bag in the garbage. Quikrete is a material to make concrete.
We noticed there was a number of scratches on the porch itself, and there were a number of gouge marks on the door. Those were all fresh. It looked like somebody was moving large pieces of furniture or something very heavy.
We entered the porch and we observed what looked like wheel impressions on the linoleum floor, consistent with a dolly going up and coming down the stairs.
The damage to the steps and door jamb are puzzling. Investigators make their way upstairs to the second floor to check things out.
As we got up to the second floor, there was a bedroom, and inside of that bedroom, there was a single mattress. Underneath the mattress and on the carpet, there was what appeared to be an alarming amount of blood.
Donald O'Sullivan has been missing for more than 2 weeks when police make a gruesome discovery at a house he owns in Melbourne, Florida.
One bedroom contained a mattress on the floor. As we got close, we could see the footwear impressions in blood. And then we observed blood on the mattress, the pooling stain.
We knew we have a crime scene. There's no doubt that now we've gone from a missing person case into a homicide investigation.
The property is locked down, and a forensic team processes the home.
When we did our initial observation downstairs, we found what we believed to be a couple baskets from a meat freezer. We looked around the residence. There was no meat freezer. That was kind of strange.
Then, flipping through papers found in the home, investigators make another intriguing discovery.
There was a receipt from a local appliance store for a freezer. And the receipt was under the name of an Eric Marshall.
The detectives wonder, could Eric Marshall be the same man trying to access Donald O'Sullivan's bank account and picking up his mail? If so, he could be the link to finding out what happened to Donald.
The obvious next step is to go to the appliance store. When we discussed the transaction with the appliance store employees, everyone knew the name of Eric Marshall. When the item was ready, the loading bay manager got on the PA and announced that an item was ready for pickup for Eric Marshall. He didn't answer. So he got on the PA again. Again, there was no response. So he got on a PA for a third time, and he just announced, "Hey, who ordered the body freezer?" At that time, Eric Marshall stood up, walked directly over to the loading bay manager, and was very upset, and asked him, "Why would you say something like that?" Then Marshall got the freezer loaded in his truck and left. But everybody remembered that event.
But who is Eric Marshall? A search of state records can find no such man.
We immediately contacted all of Doonal's friends, and what we discovered is nobody had ever heard of an Eric Marshall.
As the detectives continue to search for information about the mystery man, there's a break in another part of their investigation. A lead to the identity of the young man trying to make withdrawals from Donald O'Sullivan's bank account.
We were approached by a female who was in the bank who stated that she recognized the person that attempted to cash checks on Donald O'Sullivan's account. And that person was Daniel Kennedy.
It's a familiar name to the detectives. 26-year-old Daniel is one of the kids that Donald has been hanging out with at the coffee shop. In fact, he's a close enough friend that Donald has been paying the rent for him and his roommate, Dave Fiddler.
Dave Fiddler and Dan Kennedy were in our crew. They were living in a house next to Shacktown that was just atrocious. And they were looking at different properties. They had this one house on Pine Street that they liked, but they couldn't pass a credit check. So Donald was like, let me just rent this house, put the stuff on my name so you guys have a place to stay.
But the information from the witness at the bank tells detectives there may be more to Daniel Kennedy than they know.
When we inquired as to how she knew him, she stated, I rented a piece of property to Daniel Kennedy, and he stole my checks. So at that point, we began looking for Daniel Kennedy.
Police head to the house Donald is renting for the skateboarders.
Dave Fiddler answered the door, and he explained to us that Daniel Kennedy had just gotten out of prison in the state of New York and didn't know his whereabouts at that time.
The background information definitely raises eyebrows. Detectives head back to the station to run a check on Daniel. They learn his presence in Florida is a parole violation from a previous burglary conviction. It doesn't make him a murderer, but it is reason to arrest him.
We returned to the property. When Dave answered the door, we asked where Daniel Kennedy was. David Fiddler very clearly stated he had no idea where Daniel Kennedy was.
But as the detectives turn to leave, they notice Dave acting very strangely.
He even said, you can come in and look for him if you want. But while he was talking to the officers, he kept pointing to the back of the room.
You can store a body in a freezer indefinitely.
When he came back to the house, he discovered that he was decomposing.
I realized something wasn't right. Red flags were everywhere.
Police in Florida, hoping to question Daniel Kennedy about the disappearance of Donald O'Sullivan, have been told he's not home. But they notice that his roommate is behaving oddly.
When Dave Fiddler answered the door, he stated that he had no idea where Daniel Kennedy was. While he was talking to the officers, he kept pointing to the rear of the residence and said, see, he's not in there, and then pointed to the bathroom. When the officers opened the door in the bathroom, Daniel Kennedy was hiding in the shower and screamed, don't shoot me. They informed Daniel Kennedy that he had a warrant on him for his arrest for a parole violation and took him into custody. His excuse for hiding in the shower was that he didn't want to go back to prison on a parole violation.
The arrest sends shockwaves through the Melbourne skateboarder crew, who never suspected Daniel Kennedy of being a hardened criminal.
We knew Dan had been in some trouble and that he was kind of coming to Florida to start over. I didn't know that he had been in jail.
Well, I met Dan in Rochester, New York. He was like a big brother to me when we grew up.
When they were teenagers, Dirk's family moved to Florida. Back in New York, Daniel's life took a dark turn when he went to prison for a burglary conviction. After being released, hoping to start over, he looked up his old friend in Florida.
One day, he just shows up. I just blown away, like, what are you doing here? Out of prison, parole's done, he's flying clear, cleaning up his game. He was looking for jobs. He was working hard. Or so we thought.
But now Daniel is back in jail, and police want answers, and not just about Donald's bank account. They want to know if he can tell them anything about what happened to Donald, and if he knows Eric Marshall, the man named on a receipt found at Donald's house.
We still needed to make sure exactly who was involved in the case, and Eric Marshall was still an unknown to us. We thought that perhaps Eric Marshall is an acquaintance of Daniel Kennedy, but he had no idea who that individual was.
As far as his actions at the bank, Daniel claims there was nothing inappropriate about it.
He very matter-of-factly informed us that he was doing work for Donald Sullivan. That's how he was paid, with checks, and he was trying to cash the checks.
Deposit money out of your account from you gave me that. What kind of stuff have you do for him? No, I just like pick up the mail. Where is he right now? I don't.
Detectives find Daniel's answers to be plausible, but after the interview, they get a call that turns that assessment on its head.
We received a phone call from Dirk Schmidt that Daniel had contacted him from the county jail.
Dan asked me to grab his Bible, his rosary beads, and send it to his mom back in Rochester. And when I opened the Bible, that's when I realized inside the Bible was Donald's credit cards, Donald's license, some money in there, and blank checks. And that was where I realized something wasn't right.
Believing Daniel could be hiding even more secrets, Dirk and Daniel's roommate Dave Fiddler begin searching the house. In an unused cabinet, they uncover something strange.
There was an oatmeal cardboard cylinder, and it had a land deed in it for this property that was up in North Brevard County. I saw Dan's name. Red flags were everywhere.
After hearing from Dirk, police pull Daniel Kennedy out of his jail cell for another round of questions. Once again, he has an explanation for everything. He claims that he was holding the property deed for Donald, who purchased the land for a business venture.
And so this deed was to a place that's vacant. It's rural. There's nothing there. So it makes you wonder, why would he purchase land in Canaveral Groves?
But it's something else about the deed that really gets the investigators' attention.
The deed had David Fiddler's name on it. Then his name was crossed out, and there was a name to transfer the property to a Daniel Trinity.
The detectives note that the name Trinity is suspiciously close to Daniel's last name, Kennedy. Now they want to know why his roommate Dave Fiddler's name is also on the document. Is he hiding something from them?
Like, why was this deed here? It just didn't even make sense.
Florida detectives believe Daniel Tennedy may be involved in the disappearance of Donald O'Sullivan. They're examining a property deed connected to Donald that bears what could be Daniel's name. But they want to know why it also includes the name of Daniel's roommate, Dave Fiddler.
Police investigate this deed, and they find out that the money used to purchase the property and actually came from Donald. $2,000 in cash, $4,000 written out in checks. All from Donald's account.
David Fiddler was a little upset. He informed us that he in no way, shape, or form had any kind of involvement in that transaction whatsoever.
Dave tells police Daniel put his name on the deed without asking, to avoid any issues that might arise from a background check. But Dave told him to take his name off.
He was very cooperative, and it was obvious he was very concerned. He gave us no reason to suspect that he was being untruthful with us.
As days pass, the dread felt by Donald's family and friends only increases.
Dee was still missing, and everybody's looking for him. This is weird. You know, what happened?
Detectives continue to pore over Donald's financial statements, and they discover even more suspicious activity.
We were able to pull up some financial transactions. One of them was the rental of a backhoe. It was rented with a check from Donald O'Sullivan, and the address to deliver the backhoe matched the location on the deed.
Police rush to the remote area listed on the deed. They walk the property from end to end.
We wanted to see if they could spot anything that was unusual or disturbing. And they were like, we don't see anything.
So Melbourne police arranged for a helicopter to go out and survey the land.
And they said there's one very small area in the sand. You might want to take a look at that.
On a sunny October afternoon in the quiet suburb of Canaveral Groves, police assembled to conduct a forensic excavation in the backyard of a property they've connected to Donald O'Sullivan.
We discovered within about 8 inches of the surface a corner of something. And our crime scene people basically do an excavation of the 10 by 10 area. And within just a few minutes, they discovered a freezer. Once we dug deep enough, we saw the serial number, and we were able to match up the serial number to the freezer to the serial number that was bought at the appliance store. And it matched the receipt we found in the house.
The freezer is carefully removed from the ground and transported to the medical examiner's office for processing.
When the door was taken off of the freezer, a layer of cement was discovered. When that layer of cement was very carefully chipped away, we discovered human remains. That freezer was merely used as a coffin.
We were able to use dental records to be able to positively identify our victim, Donald O'Sullivan.
For the skater crew, the news of Donald's murder is devastating.
I remember a police officer just coming up to me and being like, "We found the body." It was the worst day ever.
When Dee died, it was like, not just did someone die, but an important person was really lost here. It was huge. It was horrible.
Though investigators have a direct connection between Daniel Tennedy and the property where they unearthed the freezer, they still are unable to locate the mysterious Eric Marshall, who signed for the appliance.
We still had no idea who this Eric Marshall person was. We got to make sure that we're not dealing with two people. We sent some investigators back to the appliance store where the freezer was bought. They had a photo lineup. In that lineup was a mug photo of Daniel Tennedy. Without any hesitation, all our witnesses identified Eric Marshall as being Daniel Tennedy. They were the same person.
Daniel Tennedy is charged with the murder of Donald O'Sullivan. But short of a confession, prosecutors fear they will not be able to prove he actually committed the murder. Daniel isn't talking, but luckily for investigators, his fellow inmates are.
This was big news in Brevard County, and even it reached the Brevard County Jail where Dan was being housed. Dan told some of the inmates, that story that you're seeing on the TV, I'm the one who killed him. I'm the one who buried him in the backyard.
We needed to determine if this was reliable information. So Daniel Tennedy will be indicted in the state of Florida for the murder of Donald O'Sullivan.
Authorities charge Daniel Tennedy with the murder of Donald O'Sullivan. He insists he's innocent. But behind bars, he tells another story to his fellow inmates at the Brevard County Jail in Florida.
Daniel Tennedy is in jail, and he starts running his mouth. He starts talking about this case. 3 different jail informants told police the exact same story.
They confirmed that Daniel Tennedy made a number of admissions and explained exactly how the murder happened. The information that he had was not public knowledge.
Dan had been forging checks from Donald's account, and at one point, Donald found out.
When Donald confronted Daniel about that, then a scuffle ensued, and Daniel killed Donald.
Although police discovered a large pool of blood on a mattress in Donald's house, the autopsy report indicates the fight ended with Daniel strangling Donald.
They were able to determine that damage to the lower neck and the hyoid bone was present.
After killing Donald, investigators surmise that Daniel Tennedy left the scene to figure out a plan for covering up his crime, leaving Donald's dead body on the mattress. The stains on the mattress are determined to be from the body beginning to decay.
Daniel tried to get what he could get as far as checks and credit cards and things. Then Daniel decided he would buy the chest freezer. He brought it to the location and loaded Donald's body in the freezer. He left the freezer in the house for several days.
And when he came back to the house, he discovered that Doodle was decomposing.
We always wondered why he just did not plug the meat freezer in. I mean, the common person would just plug it in, use the meat freezer. You can store a body in there indefinitely.
Daniel then brought the freezer back downstairs, couldn't control the freezer, it tumbled down the stairs, causing all the damage. He needed to get rid of the freezer. That's when he devised the plan of obtaining the property up in Capitol Groves and renting the backhoe and dispose of the body up there. As it turned out, Daniel had spent over $29,000 of Doodle's money, mainly just trying to dispose of the body.
It was just basically a comedy of errors for anybody how to not commit a crime.
When confronted with the overwhelming evidence against him, Daniel Kennedy decides he has no options left.
Look, the man is returned.
Daniel Kennedy pled guilty and was sentenced to a 40-year prison term for the murder of Donald Sullivan.
For Donald's band of young skateboarding pals, Daniel's admission of murder is difficult to comprehend.
You never think somebody's going to kill somebody else in your crew, ever. For me personally, it was horrible because I was the person that introduced these two people together. And that will haunt me to the day I die. Excuse me.
Donald was a good soul, and his removal from this world in such a wicked way was a shame, because the world was a better place for Dee being in it.
I don't know what better legacy there could be than have people who knew you just say you're the best kind of person. I think that's what he would have wanted.
A shotgun blast through a windshield ends the life of a dedicated father in an instant.
I saw the carnage in this car. It reminded me of a mob-style execution.
An execution the victim feared was coming.
He had been the target of the earlier shooting, where they didn't get him. Whoever had done the first shooting had gotten away and had not been identified.
He knew somebody was trying to kill him.
He was wearing a bulletproof vest at the time that he was killed.
Investigators realize no witness is safe.
People were just scared
That if they said anything, they would either be killed or hauled.
One detective must risk it all to expose a heartless mastermind.
She gave me instructions to meet her at the cemetery and to come alone. Worst case was that somebody was going to be waiting there to ambush me.
Authorities uncover a meticulous plot crafted by a powerful criminal.
It was fairly astounding the control she was able to exert over other people.
She was a woman that you need to be careful of, because if you crossed her, she was going to get you.
November 18th, 1991, Spokane, Washington. It's 7 p.m. when a frenzy of 911 calls flood into the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, reporting a shooting at the Willow Street Apartments.
I was home after a full day shift on a Monday night when I got a call that I was needed to respond to a homicide scene in the Spokane Valley.
When first responders arrive, they quickly gather information from several of the witnesses who called 911.
People in the complex heard the gunshots and then, immediately called police. The person that did this then escaped right away.
They direct officers to a vehicle where they locate an unresponsive male slumped behind the steering wheel.
Deputies found him shot dead in his vehicle. And detectives, forensics, people were called out and started their investigation there at the scene.
The crime scene was a small apartment complex parking lot. There was a male in the car that was fully dressed, still seatbelted into the driver's seat, and he had a massive head and face wound.
The level of carnage is shocking, even for seasoned detectives.
He'd been shot point blank almost. The shot had actually been through the window glass. He had died instantly. I saw the carnage in this car. There was no question that he was a target that somebody was making sure that they eliminated. It reminded me of a mob-style execution. We've been down a lot of homicide scenes, and we just didn't see those in our area.
Whoever pulled the trigger left a key piece of evidence on the ground just a few feet from the car.
The person that committed the crime left the shotgun there. The shotgun led us to initially feel that was probably the murder weapon. It was a Winchester 12 gauge. The only distinguishing things on it was a little chunk of wood that was broken out of the stock, and there was some type of paint rub off on the stock as well.
While technicians continue processing the crime scene, detectives question residents of the apartment complex to ID the victim.
He was identified as Peter Zion. He was 40 years old. The witnesses in the apartment complex told us that he was a resident there at the apartments along with his girlfriend, and that he had probably just arrived home from work when the shooting occurred.
But none of Pete's neighbors have any idea why he would have been the target of such a brutal murder.
Starting into this investigation, there was many background questions surrounding Pete Zion. This was a target. This man was wanted dead by somebody, and they made sure they got him.
Why would somebody sneak up on you in an ambush attack?
Born on June 27, 1951, Peter Zion came from modest roots.
Pete had grown up in Chewela, Washington. They lived on a small farm where they had a mill.
Pete's father was a real hard-working guy that would work the fields and knew how to do just about everything around the farm. Pete's mom was on the city council. They were a strong base for Pete to grow up under.
With a work ethic as strong as his parents, Pete pursued a career in a highly demanded trade.
Pete and I met at Spokane Community College while we were taking industrial electricity. Pete was a good electrician, hard worker, friendly, outgoing, kind of almost bubbly.
At 35 years old, Pete was living in Spokane, Washington, when he met someone who would change his life forever. 30-year-old Oreen Goldberg. An avid runner, she met Pete during a local road race.
Her parents, Bill Goldberg and Joanne, they had one son, that was Theo. They had two daughters, Maureen and Merv. They were very well known.
Oreen worked for her parents at their realty office in Newport, Washington, 1 hour outside of Spokane.
Joanne Goldberg as the matriarch and the main head of the family. She made the decisions. She insisted things be done her way. Mel was pretty easygoing and was really friendly, was a really nice guy.
Pete and Oreen dated for about a year before moving in together. 4 months later, Oreen became pregnant. They married in 1988 after the birth of their daughter and made their home in Spokane.
His eyes would just twinkle talking about this little girl. He'd smile from ear to ear. He thought she was just heaven on earth.
But by 1989, not everything in Pete's life was going as smoothly as fatherhood.
I think not long after the child was born that their marriage started to go south.
He was a good father. His daughter meant a lot to him. He made that very clear. And I think that he would have stayed married just for the sake of his daughter.
When their attempts to reconcile failed, Oreen left with their infant daughter.
When she left and took the child, she moved up to Newport, Washington, which is about 60 miles from Spokane. That was to her parents' residence.
Lauren kind of kept a low profile and let her mother, Joanne, really handle things.
Pete began traveling to the Goldbergs on the weekends to spend time with his daughter and eventually filed for divorce.
That, of course, involved a request for visitation with his daughter and at least partial custody of his daughter. And that just didn't sit well with Joanne. That's not the way that she imagined her family, with the granddaughter being able to be away for any period of time.
The divorce proceedings, they became a bit ugly. Joanne had basically told Peter that there's no way you're going to get my granddaughter.
He was going through the custody battle. He was sad, kind of depressed over the whole situation. He wanted to get his mind in a position where he could go on with his life.
While Pete struggled for access to his beloved daughter, he found solace in his work and eventually met someone new. 34-year-old Helen Eakin.
We had some discussions about her, and she was a very good person, had a good, responsible job.
In the fall of 1990, about a year after his split from Maureen, Pete was starting to settle into a new life with Helen.
He was living with Helen at her apartment. Her and Pete were waiting for the divorce to be final so they could move forward in a relationship.
He was going through a hard time, going through a divorce, but he still had a good outlook on life.
But Pete's attempt at a fresh start is cut short on November 18, 1991.
Peter is shot point blank range with the shotgun through the window right at his head, and he dies instantly. The shotgun is dropped there at the scene. The assailant fled.
Though the scene indicates an ambush, what investigators discover under Pete's coat swiftly calls that theory into question.
He was carrying a handgun. Plus, he was also wearing a bulletproof vest. It was not common for us to encounter people wearing bulletproof vests at that time. that he had with him was quite unusual. He told me that he was scared. He was trying to protect himself.
Yeah. Detectives discover this isn't the first time the victim faced an armed assailant hell-bent on murder.
This person was chasing him, bullets hitting off brick through the alley.
He was a changed guy. Paranoia set in.
November 18th, 1991, Spokane, Washington. Investigators on the scene of Pete Zion's ambush-style murder are working to piece together a puzzling array of clues.
Crime scene essentially consisted of the car that the victim was in, his body, and the shotgun on the ground. There really wasn't any other physical evidence. There was no video evidence or anything else at that scene.
While there are no surveillance cameras in the area, police do find a potential witness.
At the time of the shooting, one of the tenants in the apartments, Pamela, heard the shot, ran outside, and saw a gold or tan-colored vehicle accelerate very fast out of the parking lot onto the street. She couldn't really say for sure the people, that there was more than one. She just knew there was a noise and there was a car racing out of there. Her being able to identify the car as specifically as she did was pretty helpful because a lot of witnesses aren't that good.
Officers fan out in search of the vehicle based on the description, while detectives begin tracking down Pete's loved ones.
At the time of his murder, Peter was living with his girlfriend, Helen Eakin.
Investigators immediately locate the couple's apartment within the complex to break the news.
This is typical police procedure to interview boyfriends, girlfriends, significant others.
Meeting with Helen, her reaction to Pete being dead was appropriate to someone who had just suffered a severe loss. She was home for the evening. She had heard the sound of the shotgun, but didn't realize what it was. Unfortunately, hadn't gone outside.
When detectives ask Helen about the handgun and bulletproof vest found on Pete, Helen reveals some startling news.
He had also been the target of an earlier shooting where they didn't get him. Approximately 2 weeks earlier was October 25th at 7 o'clock in the morning. He had gotten up for work, noticed that his tire was flat on his car, and he drove across the street to a mini mart. He went to reinflate the tire, at which time he noticed that somebody was standing by him, and when he looked up, there was a figure that had a Richard Nixon mask on. That person was holding a revolver.
This person's completely disguised, heavy clothing and something over their face, and they immediately fire a round at him. He reacts by jumping up, starts running. This person keeps chasing him, shooting rounds as he runs.
This short, stocky person was chasing him, bullets hitting off brick through the alley.
None of the rounds hit him, and the person finally leaves and out of sight. He gets on the phone, calls 911, says he got shot at.
Helen confirms that Pete filed a police report 2 weeks earlier.
Whoever had done this first shooting at Pete Zion had gotten away and had not been identified. The examination of the scene determined that there was a hole in the tire in a place that somebody had punctured the tire intentionally to let the air out.
In Pete's statement on October 25th, he offered up his own theory of who was responsible.
He told detectives that the reason why I think this happened is because I'm in a bitter child custody dispute. Peter, made it very clear that if anything happened to him, that it would be his ex-wife's family that they needed to look at.
So I'm a short time after that, and he was a changed guy. I mean, paranoia had set in on him. He was scared to death because back in his mind, he knew somebody was trying to kill him.
He told them, well, from now on, I'm going to start carrying a sidearm with me and wear a bulletproof vest.
Though Pete felt confident he knew who was out to kill him, he died before investigators could substantiate his claims.
That case was still being looked into at the time the murder occurred. Another detective handled that investigation, and the issues with Pete's estranged wife, Maureen, and the child custody had been brought up, but there hadn't been any interviews conducted yet. There wasn't really much evidence to really narrow it down.
After learning of Pete's accusations towards his former in-laws, homicide detectives reach out to Pete's longtime attorney to learn more about the custody battle.
They appointed a guardian ad litem, which is not unusual in a divorce case. So the guardian ad litem is there to protect the child and to give a candid opinion to the judge as to who would be the best parent. Your report said that Maureen should have custody and that Pete would have traditional visitation, which would include overnights on weekends.
Maureen's family had sworn that he's never going to see his daughter. Joanne could not stand to have her granddaughter be given to Peter, her son-in-law, even on the weekend. She decided she would take care of it. And her way to try and take care of it is she alleged sexual abuse by Mr. Zion on his own daughter.
Pete denied these false allegations against him. Child Protective Services got involved. The Spokane Police Department got involved and were conducting an investigation. They said that there was a lack of probable cause, and the clinical psychologist thought it was unusual that she met with Oreen and that there was never any discussion about any sexual abuse with the child, and then all of a sudden it pops up afterwards. So they came to the decision that there wasn't any substance to these allegations.
With his name cleared, Pete continued to advocate for visitation.
It was coming down to a pivotal time in the divorce proceedings because the trial was forthcoming.
The final decisions were going to be made, who the child would go with, if there was going to be child support, visitation, those types of issues that surrounded the child.
As homicide detectives dig into the police report from the first attempt on Pete's life, one detail immediately stands out.
In that first shooting, 3 weeks before Pete was murdered, there was another witness in the parking lot that has seen this car leaving the scene. It was a tan or a brown colored car, and it had fled out of the area, out of view.
He knew that there was a connection with the getaway car because of the fact that, it was described as a brown car. In the first shooting, second shooting as well.
Detectives released the witness's description of the vehicle to the public.
It's a shot in the dark, but you try to at least get something to start looking for.
Coming up, a flood of tips rushes in.
Witnesses came out to the same vehicle that had been parked in front of their residence for a couple of weeks.
And the killer tries to silence witnesses at any cost.
She was really afraid of providing more information.
They said, not for nothing, but we're extremely scared of this family.
Within a couple of weeks, the house had been set on fire.
November 19th, 1991. Less than 24 hours after the murder of 40-year-old Pete Zion, a bolo issued for the getaway car yields promising leads from Spokane locals.
Photos were publicly disseminated of the vehicle. Witnesses recognized those photos and made contact with the sheriff's office.
We got called that this car was sitting out pretty much in plain view in front of this lady's house, approximately half a mile or so from where the murder occurred.
Investigators respond and find a car matching the description of the getaway vehicle parked on the suburban street.
The vehicle was recovered abandoned in front of a residential house. The license plates had been altered to make them not identifiable immediately.
The altered plates raise the level of suspicion. Inside the unlocked Chevrolet, investigators find the VIN and run it through their database.
It turned out the car had been stolen about 3 weeks prior to all this from an area of North Spokane, about 10 miles from where the murder occurred. Because of that, we were able to seize this evidence. We still hadn't necessarily confirmed it as the murder vehicle, but we did take a picture of it back to Pamela at the apartment complexes. She identified that car in the picture as the same one she had seen leaving the scene of the murder.
While crime scene techs sweep the car for evidence, investigators interview Pete's estranged wife, Oreen, and her parents, Mel and Joanne, on November 19th.
Police suspected the family members because of all of just the rancor and the animosity that had come up from the divorce proceedings.
Mel, Joanne, and Oreen said that they would be willing to sit down and answer any of our questions, but only as a group, and that was the only way they could do it.
The family offers alibis for the night of Pete's murder.
And the family told investigators that they were at family dinner.
Joanne and Mel's daughter and son-in-law, Irv and Greg, alibied them for that late afternoon, early evening. The family had shown up sometime in the afternoon and stayed for dinner. So from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, they were at Greg and Irv's house.
Family members all had strong alibis, and police couldn't connect the family to the first shooting or the second shooting.
With nothing to hold the Goldberg family on, investigators let them go.
We could not say who actually pulled the triggers.
And detectives hit another dead end when the search of the suspected getaway vehicle yields no results.
We were feeling pretty confident we had the right car, but we didn't have anything in the car immediately to identify anybody that had used it.
Without any physical evidence and no new leads to follow, the investigation begins to stall in 1992.
It wasn't progressing much, and I had other cases I was working on, but I would make callbacks often to everybody that we talked to before to develop further information, but it was moving slowly.
It really goes cold when there's not other tips or new information coming in to act upon.
In late November of 1993, Newport residents Bob Lamb and Marcy Harrington reach out to the Spokane County Sheriff's Office with information that could break the case wide open.
Bob and Marcy Harrington were neighbors of the Goldbergs' property up in the Newport area. They said they were the owner of the shotgun that was used in this murder. Of course, that got my attention immediately.
Detectives are curious. After all, they've never released a description of the murder weapon to the public.
Bob Lamb identified this shotgun specifically with the particulars about the damage to the wood stock and the paint rub-off. They had it stored kind of off the hallway, up against behind the door. One day, Maureen's brother, Phil Goldberg, had showed up. He picked it up, walked out with it. It wasn't new because Phil Goldberg was known to borrow their stuff often.
But after Pete's murder, they say Theo started acting strange.
He went back to the neighbor and attempted to buy the weapon from him, explaining that he couldn't return it.
Investigators asked Bob and Marcy why it took them so long to contact police, and they confess their guilt has finally outweighed their fear.
They said, not for nothing, but we are extremely scared of this family, and we didn't come forward to cooperate originally with any information because of our extreme fear.
After speaking with Bob and Marcy, it quickly becomes clear that the couple had a good reason to be afraid.
Within a couple of weeks, Bob and Marcy's husband was dead. We were pretty convinced that it was a plan. And it was because the conversations about them being witnesses where they be asked to testify.
Despite the assertions, nothing links the Goldberg family to the fire.
And of course, as a result, Mr. Lamb decided they no longer wanted to cooperate out of fear of what might happen to them.
After the fire, Pete's case stagnates yet again, leaving investigators frustrated.
Someone is making sure that no one's going to talk because they're going to be fearful for their lives. So without any hard evidence whatsoever, the police are just stuck. This case languishes for several years. There is no break in the case whatsoever.
Then, in 1999, 8 years after Pete's murder, investigators get a big break.
We got a call in my office from a lady who was real mysterious, and she wanted to talk about the Pete Zion murder. She knew somebody who had told her they had committed this murder. She was pretty reluctant. She mentioned being fearful. This caller, after quite a bit, convinced me. Finally said, "I'll tell you my first name," which she did. It was Shirley.
Shirley agrees to meet Detective Henderson, but only under certain conditions.
She said, "Well, you come and meet me, and it's going to be in the cemetery outside of town." She said, "If I see anybody else or any police cars around," she says, "I'm not. You won't ever talk to me again."
Coming up. To solve the case, Detective Henderson puts his life on the line.
The worst case that came to mind was that somebody was there to either ambush me or was going to come in with guns blaring.
July 1999. It's been 8 years since Pete Zion's brutal murder. Detective Mark Henderson was heading to a cemetery in northern Idaho to meet a potential witness alone.
I did not think it was a smart idea, but I think it was a calculated risk that I felt after years of chasing this case, this may be the golden key. Kind of was on alert until this pickup shows up and meet this lady. And she starts telling some details about the murder case. She mentioned where the car had been stashed and gave the information on the gun. She knows about this murder better than I do. Either she did it or she's talking to the person who did it.
When Detective Henderson asks Shirley who her source is, she brings a longtime suspect back into the spotlight. Her new friend, Joanne.
Joanne and Bill Goldberg, her husband, got a divorce relatively quickly after Pete's death. And Joanne resettled up in Idaho.
Formerly Joanne Goldberg, Shirley's neighbor since 1998 now goes by her maiden name, Peterson. Shirley says over the past year, the two women became fast friends. But things took a turn recently when Joanne began divulging a dark secret.
Joanne started to open up about her life and things she had done. And she started talking about the murder of Peter Zion. And admitted that she was the mastermind behind it.
Not only does Shirley now have statements from her, but Joanne offers to take her to Spokane for lunch. And after they're done with lunch, Joanne drives her a short distance away into this parking lot of this apartment complex, stops, points at a slot, and says, "That's where Pete got shot and killed at." It was a very detailed statement made by Shirley. She's got her pointing out the crime scene and describing it to her to a T, basically.
Shirley's statement is shocking, but detectives need to corroborate her story before they can bring Joanne in. Then, a little over a month later, they get an unexpected visit from her son, Theo, and her daughter, Merv.
Theo and his sister decide that they gotta talk. So they go to the police and tell them what had happened to Peter Zion and that their mother had killed him.
The two then provide detectives with details about the night of November 18th, 1991.
The night of the murder, Merv and her husband get a phone call from Joanne, who says they're in Spokane at a store and they're heading towards Merv's house. This is probably 7:30-ish in the evening, and they said, well, why? They were going to demand Merv alibi them for that late afternoon, early evening.
But Theo Goldberg admits to a much bigger role in the murder.
Theo was the one who got a hold of the weapon that ultimately was used to kill Peter Zion. He got the shotgun from the neighbors and then took it to his mother.
Theo confirms that in addition to the murder, his parents were involved in the first ambush on Pete.
Theo confirmed Joanne was the trigger person and that all of them had been part of the plan, including Marie.
Detectives ask why the siblings have decided to come forward now after all these years.
They became convinced that Joanne was going off the deep end and she was coming after them and Mel. Joanne had started making some threats towards Mel, and Theo was getting real concerned about being around her. He was essentially getting scared of her.
I think keeping this family secret for so long was weighing on Theo. He was just so overcome with that guilt. And I think with finally deciding he didn't want to be controlled like he was being controlled by his mother, that he finally decided to come forward.
Theo says Irene continued to raise her daughter, and the family intended to insulate her from any trouble. But things haven't worked out as planned.
Maureen, at the time, was suffering from brain cancer, and she was at high risk of, that ending her life.
In late October 1999, officers move in on Joanne Peterson.
We took Joanne into custody on the federal weapons charge on that date.
When news of Joanne's arrest spreads, her ex-husband Mel Goldberg surrenders to police.
He basically opened up and said, yeah, I did this. She did it, and I was involved. I was the getaway driver.
Mel agrees to tell detectives exactly what happened the night of the murder.
He filled in blanks. Mel and Joanne were waiting to see Pete pull in his parking lot. They had a place where they could watch him from discreetly.
After Mr. Zion had backed his car in, Mel drove up to Mr. Zion's vehicle. Miss Peterson got out of the passenger side of the vehicle with the shotgun.
Mel tells police Joanne wanted to make sure that Peter would know that she was the one that was going to kill him. And she looked him right in the eye and pulled the trigger.
After she had discharged his firearm into Mr. Zion, killing him, she dropped the shotgun.
I don't think that shotgun was meant to be left behind. I think she shot that gun and it surprised the hell out of her.
Coming up, the case seems like a surefire win for prosecutors.
At this point, really the case is going to be a slam dunk.
But the defendants had other plans.
We expect him to plead guilty because he fully confessed, but he didn't.
Following detailed confessions from Joanne Peterson's estranged family, police file an array of charges in the murder of Pete Zion.
Both Mr. Goldberg and Joanne Peterson were charged with aggravated first-degree murder. And Theo was charged with first-degree murder because he had obtained the shotgun knowing what it would be used for.
Despite suspicions of her involvement, Pete's ex-wife Maureen continues to evade the law.
Maureen, at the time of the prosecution, was suffering from brain cancer. It wasn't a slam dunk case against her, and the elected prosecutor ultimately made the decision that she would not be charged for those reasons.
In January 2000, Theo Goldberg cements his fate.
Theo pled guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder. Of course, that was a negotiated plea. He got the benefit of the fact that he came forward and broke this case.
Theo Goldberg received a fairly lenient sentence for his cooperation, and he agreed to testify in trial against his parents.
At this point, really the case is going to be a slam dunk.
We expected Mel to plead guilty because he fully confessed, but he didn't.
When the time comes for Mel Goldberg to submit his plea, his decision is a shock to prosecutors.
He decided, I'm going to trial.
Mel Goldberg was scared to death of Joanne Peterson. He would have done whatever she requested him to do during the time they were married.
But prosecutors argue he is far from innocent.
It was very clear to us as prosecutors that he was highly involved in the planning, and he was actively involved, of course, in covering up the murder after it occurred. Mr. Goldberg was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
As prosecutors prepare for Joanne's trial, they work to pin down her motive.
Joanne's a person who was just totally self-involved and controlling, wanted to control every part of her own life, and so that extended to her family. And she just could not envision having her granddaughter leaving her family to visit even with her own biological father. She decided to commit this murder so that he would not get visitation in this custody case.
Prosecutors are ready to argue their case in December of 2000. But suddenly they get word Joanne has changed her mind.
Joanne turns around and pleads guilty to the murder. Completely surprised me and all of us. There was no way that she was going to plead guilty. Joanne was the talker and the person who loved bragging about stuff. It's like, didn't see that coming.
Joanne decided to plead guilty to first-degree murder. I'm sure that Joanne Peterson's attorney advised her that she was at high risk of getting an aggravated murder conviction, in which case she would have gotten a sentence of life in prison. She would have never gotten it.
Father, the impact of Joanne's manipulation will not soon be forgotten.
He was always a good father, very caring, loved his daughter dearly. Not only were her grandparents in prison, and her mom dies and her dad's dead, this poor girl just ended up with no family. She never did get a chance to know her father's family, and that was a real shame.
People had great respect for Pete. Pete was just a wonderful person. He was always happy, in a good mood. He was a hard worker. He was friendly. It was hard to find fault with Pete.
Gil Goldberg was released from prison in 2004 after serving 3 years of his 4-year sentence. Orrin Goldberg died of brain cancer in 2005 when her daughter was 18 years old. Mel Goldberg died in prison in April of 2020. 2 months later, Joanne Peterson died while serving her life sentence at Washington State Prison.
The murder of a beloved social worker shatters a Midwestern town.
It was just shocking, violent death.
She was found face down and her clothing was disheveled.
Given the victim's line of work, there's no shortage of suspects.
They immediately began to assume that it was someone who had a personal animus toward her.
For over a decade, the brutal attack goes unsolved until a guilty conscience finally cracks.
He said he was with them when they killed the social worker.
He had kept us inside for 13 years, and I believe he wanted to tell somebody.
There had been a violent attack and sexual assault.
And she's telling him, give her what she deserves.
She's a narcissistic, homicidal sociopath.
For her to die the way she did made our stomachs turn.
He said it was horrible. A horrible, horrible death that nobody ever wanted to see.
April 15th, 1990, 10:15 a.m. It's Easter Sunday in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and District Attorney Robert Jamboys is preparing to spend the holiday with family.
My wife and I were getting ready to go visit my parents and then her parents. So just as we were getting ready to leave, I get this phone call of a suspicious death scene in my office. Didn't tell me who it was. We didn't have that many homicides in Kenosha County. But I instituted a policy the preceding year that I was to be called to the scene of every suspicious death.
With limited details, DA Jamboys heads to the scene, unsure of what awaits him.
When I arrived there, they hadn't even cordoned off the residence. I asked the officers to establish a crime scene perimeter around the entire front yard and backyard of the residence so that we couldn't have people coming and going as they chose. I wanted everybody out of the residence until our crime scene crew had gone through there.
As he approaches the victim, DA Jamboys stops in his tracks.
I went inside to inspect the scene, and there was Connie Reyes on the floor. I knew Connie Reyes. I knew her because I was the district attorney and my office prosecuted child abuse cases. She was a very, very, very fine social worker.
I admired her and I very much liked her, and I was genuinely shocked and horrified to see that she'd been murdered.
The question now is, what could have led to this horrific scene?
I don't know that they definitively ever decided she had a bite mark or not, but it looked like she had some marks on her body.
It appeared to me as though there were strangulation marks around her neck.
As news of Connie's murder spreads, her community struggles to understand who could have done this to such a beloved woman.
Connie Reyes was a very well-respected social worker. She loved children. She was just a good person. She did not get what she deserved.
Born in 1932, Concepcion Connie Reyes was raised in the Philippines with her 3 siblings.
We lived in San Juan in the Philippines, which is around Manila.
She was born there, she grew up there, she went to school in the Philippines. She came to the United States to go to teacher college and then stayed here and began her career.
Her career had always been devoted to children.
She worked in the local schools here in Kenosha as a teacher.
In the late 1960s, after teaching grade school in the U.S. for multiple years, Connie got her master's degree in social work and began working with the Department of Social Services in Kenosha.
She helped children in abusive homes. She would kind of monitor the situation to see if the children needed to be taken out of the homes. And I'm sure she saw a lot of not so pleasant things, but she was dedicated to her job.
Connie was the kind of person that would do everything she could to try to reunify the family, but she also would do everything she could to pursue the termination of all rights at the same time. My office prosecuted child abuse cases, so I knew Connie Reyes and I admired her.
She felt very strongly about the mission of Children and Family Services. It was her life.
She was so well respected as a social worker and an advocate for children.
Connie was also deeply devoted to her family, and in 1978, she sponsored her brother Paul and his family for American citizenship.
We actually lived with her in her 2-bedroom apartment. We are a family of 5, and we lived with her for a good month or 2, and she never complained.
We didn't have furniture. We had to leave a lot of our toys behind. Connie was a tremendous help in really helping us set up our household and getting us back on our feet in a new country. She was involved in our lives. We were involved in hers.
Throughout the 1980s, as her nieces grew into young women, Connie remained a strong presence in their lives.
We spent all holidays with her. She was a great cook.
She was really our only family in Wisconsin. She was aunt, she was grandmother, she was uncle, she was everything to us.
With a career she loved and her family behind her every step of the way, Connie was living the life she'd always imagined.
She was certainly highly regarded by the judges and by the prosecutors and by the defense bar in Kenosha County. She was a really wonderful, warm human being. I really enjoyed working with her, and I found her to be inspiring.
As Kenosha investigators stand over Connie's lifeless body, they can't fathom who could have viciously murdered this pillar of the community.
I remember because it was Easter Sunday, that's when I heard the news. I had expected to see her that night.
Connie Reyes is very deeply loved by those people who knew her, especially by her family members and her friends.
Outside the residence, detectives arrive and turn to the person who called 911, Connie's friend and co-worker, Joanne Slater.
Joanne Slater and her husband were very close to Connie, and they hadn't talked to her in a day or 2. So they went to the house, and that's when they discovered her body in the house.
Joanne had indicated that Connie Reyes was diabetic and that she was aware that she had gone home early from work on Thursday, April 12th. She had fallen ill, maybe due to the diabetes or something else.
Joanne tells investigators she had a spare key to Connie's house and went to check on her.
The paper boy, as I understand it, left some papers between the screen door and the front door.
Joanne went to the front door, and all the newspapers had fallen out, so it's obvious nobody had opened that door. She unlocked the front door, and she went in and found Connie Reyes' body.
Connie Reyes was found face down, and her clothing was disheveled. Her friend who found her called 911 and reported her death.
Though Joanne is unable to provide any further details, investigators suspect she was the last person to see Connie alive on Thursday, April 12th.
At that time, Kenosha News was delivered in the afternoon, so they were able to pinpoint that from the time she left work, which was around 11 o'clock or so, to 4:30 in the afternoon would have been the time frame that she was murdered.
After speaking to Joanne, investigators begin documenting the crime scene, starting with Connie's body.
It was readily apparent that Connie Reyes had been murdered, and it looked like she'd been strangled. The way her clothing was, it just looked to me like she'd been sexually assaulted.
She was wearing a little blouse and sweater up, with the sweater over her head, the blouse up, the bra up.
Detectives found a pubic hair and a partial fingerprint on her glasses.
The presence of the pubic hair was consistent with their belief that it had been a male assailant.
Detectives fan out across the home in search of more evidence.
The police conducted the examination of the home and determined that there was no evidence that there were things taken from the home. Her purse and wallet were still there and undisturbed.
There was no sign of any forced entry, so that tells you right away it had to be someone that she knew and she let into the house.
The assumption was that it was not a property crime. It was something that was motivated by personal animus toward Connie Reyes.
For her to die the way she did, go through what she went through, was shocking and made her stomach stir.
Coming up, investigators uncover a string of possible suspects.
Connie was assigned the toughest cases.
They were Satan worshipers. They were all confessing to killing Connie.
Investigators in Kenosha, Wisconsin are desperate for a lead in the 24 hours following the discovery of social worker Connie Reyes murdered in her own home on Easter weekend 1990.
It pretty much sent shockwaves through our department because she was a very well-liked, very well-respected woman.
Adding to the shock of Connie's death is the brutal way she met her end.
There had been a violent attack and sexual assault.
Unfortunately, there isn't much at the scene for detectives to work with.
The physical evidence showed that she was murdered, but we didn't have DNA testing available.
A lot of times in a case like this, the focus would be on some disgruntled former partner or someone of that nature, and there wasn't anybody like that to focus on.
She was never married, and as far as any romantic relationships, I was not aware of any.
Knowing Connie was dedicated to her job, investigators begin their search for potential enemies by looking at her most difficult clients.
Connie was assigned the toughest cases. She was very deeply committed to the protection, safety, and welfare of children.
She would occasionally have to remove the kids from a home for their benefit, as well as trying to get the parents back in line. It was kind of a last ditch, this is what I got to do.
So they immediately began to focus on the possibility that it was one of her former clients, and particularly a male, given the nature of the sexual assault.
There was so many different possible directions based on Connie's caseload, people that she's had to deal with, and this could go over a period of years, not just who she was working with currently.
Their suspect list dwindled to about 4 or 5 people that she had had some tension with families that worked. as far as removing kids from the home. That, of course, would be one of the top priorities to bring these people in and talk to them, find out where they were, what they did that particular day or time frame, and if they had any alibi, and then follow up on the alibi. Some people interviewed were able to provide viable alibis, but eventually they were dismissed as potential suspects. There was no new viable information.
As much as investigators dig, they're never able to gain traction.
After about 48 hours, you're starting to work the cold case. Detectives had interviewed just about everyone that they needed to, and their alibis either checked out or they had a reason why they were there. And after about 2 years, it just dried up. And with no new leads coming in, it goes to the back burner.
As days turn to months, turn to years with no leads, Connie's loved ones struggle to cope with the lack of closure.
Not knowing what happened to her was extremely frustrating. This didn't happen in a vacuum. Obviously, there were people that went in there and did this to her. Why is it difficult for anybody to figure this out? What are the police doing? What leads do they have? What are they following? What are they doing? Didn't get a lot of answers.
The previous detective bureau captain kept this case closed but open in that if a new lead came in. And some of the detectives that worked on the case originally retired, and they were a little upset that they were never able to solve that crime.
In June 1995, 5 years after the murder, the Connie Reyes case lands on the desk of newly minted detective Christine Funk.
I was just promoted to detective, and my supervisor at the time said, "We'll just work on it when you have time, or see what you can do with it, look into some of the old suspects and so forth." So I did that in my spare time, and I did try to develop a couple different suspects. She had this group of kids she was trying to help that were Satan worshipers. So I investigated that with another detective. We worked that together and tried to see if we could get anything out of these kids.
When Detective Funk speaks to friends of the teens, she learns an alarming accusation.
They were all confessing to killing her.
Investigators immediately bring all 4 teens in for questioning, but it's clear they have a ringleader.
Eric Sanchez was the main one. After speaking to him and speaking to a lot of people who were his friends, he was also confessing to them that he had killed her, but he didn't have any of the pertinent information. He didn't do it.
As another lead dries up, when interviewing neighbors of Connie Reyes, detectives get a promising new suspect.
Sergeant Brody lived across the street from the Reyes residence. And when he was interviewed by Lieutenant Funk, he remembered that there was this person in the area that was acting inappropriately.
Sergeant Brody said that there was a neighborhood young man who was acting out aggressively against a lot of the women in the neighborhood at the time, just prior to her murder. Like chasing them from their cars with their groceries to their back doors.
The 38-year-old described by the sergeant is Terry Thompson, who lived just around the corner from Connie's house.
So I talked to all the women in the neighborhood. There were several that did state that they were afraid of him. He'd be running around the neighborhood all the time at odd hours.
On Wednesday, November 8, 1995, detectives confront Terry.
We asked him, "Could you please come down to the police station, and we'd just like to talk to you about the Connie Reyes homicide." And he said, "Oh, of course I would." So he came with us, and we had an interview room. He talked to us for hours, actually.
As detectives turn up the heat on Terry, he makes a shocking confession.
He came right up to the point where he said, "Yes, I went into Connie's house on such and such a day. It was near Easter time. He couldn't remember the day, but he said he pounded on the door, and he got her to open the door, and he said he did step into the house, and that's as far as he would go.
Coming up, just as they are about to break the case, detectives are stonewalled.
I actually received a letter saying I can never talk to him again.
And the seemingly random crime uncovers a long-buried secret.
I called the Kenosha Police Department and I had asked if they had ever solved Connie Reyes' case. They said, no, we have not. I said, well, I might be able to help you.
Five and a half years after Connie Reyes was strangled to death, one of her neighbors, Terry Thompson, has admitted to forcing his way into her house around the time of the murder.
What he said was, I was angry with her because she refused to help me learn to read. He knew she was a social worker and he was trying to get her to help him to read. But this is as far as we got because his family had an attorney show up at the police department for him, so we had to stop. And then I actually received a letter saying I can never talk to him again. He did have some emotional and mental issues. Yet we couldn't tie him to the crime. We had no probable cause to charge him.
Investigators' hands are tied.
We couldn't have access to him. At the end of our dealings with Terry Thompson, we could not rule him out as a suspect because of his admission of going into the house and his behavior.
At yet another dead end, Detective Funk decides to keep tabs on Terry while revisiting the evidence from the crime scene.
I did run everything that was available to me through DNA again when I got the case, but it was degraded over time because the way they stored it back then was not proper and things got moldy and it's useless. The hair guy at the FBI did whatever he could with that, and because of the fragments, he couldn't match it to anybody. So there was actually no DNA evidence that we could use.
As years tick by, Connie's family remains haunted by her death.
I remember for several years after my aunt's murder, I would have dreams where I would be in a room with her. And she would say, I have something very important to tell you. And then I would wake up and I would never know what she was trying to tell me. I believed she wasn't at peace until this question could be answered about what really happened to her and who did this to her.
Finally, 13 years after the murder, on February 25th, 2003, a call comes in from a woman named Linda Goulon that shakes the dust off this cold case once and for all.
I called the Kenosha Police Department and I had asked if they had ever solved Connie Reyes' case. They said, no, we have not. And I said, well, I might be able to help you.
Linda is a former Kenosha resident who recently moved to Mississippi with her husband Chester.
In February of 2003, they were staying with their good friend Sandra Bobo. She had taken them in because they were out of a job, they had no money.
According to Linda, things got rocky when Chester stole Sandra's silverware to try to make some quick cash.
She threatened to go to the police. Then he finally came to and told her that he found it.
Sandra gave him an opportunity to go get it back, but he didn't do it. So Sandra Bobo called the Monroe County Sheriff's Department, and they actually brought Chester in, and we're going to charge him with theft.
Chester was afraid of being arrested in Mississippi for the theft. And somehow in the conversation, he admitted that he had been involved in this homicide.
He started stating things like, the police in Kenosha are after me. They want to know about that homicide or that murder of the social worker. I can't go back there. They can't know about me.
After hanging up with Linda, Detective Funk springs into action.
I then went to Captain McNamara and I said, We gotta go to Mississippi.
On March 9, 2003, Detective Funk arrives in Aberdeen, Mississippi, and decides to speak with Sandra Bobo first.
So we got to ask questions about where we found it. And he was talking about he was scared to death of this.
What was he saying about Kenosha? Felt he was in trouble.
He said that he was also running from the case in Kenosha. And I said, what has Kenosha got to do with what you're doing down here?
Sandra says it was then that Chester brought up two of their mutual acquaintances from back in Wisconsin, Gaylord Gomez and Linda Dancer.
We kept saying, why is Gaylord and Linda involved in this? They weren't here when we started somewhere. What are they holding against you? He said, I know for a fact that Gaylord had killed him. I said, how do you know that? Why are you sitting there saying no? He said, because he was with them when they killed the social worker. And I just froze. He said it was horrible. A horrible, horrible death that nobody ever wants to see.
Has he told you that he's fearful?
He said he was scared to death of Gaylord. That if he talked, they would be after him.
Sandra was friends with Chester, but she knew Gaylord Gomez and she knew Linda Dancer from the past. But she stayed away from them. She says, I really didn't like them.
According to Sandra, Linda and Gaylord may have had a motive for wanting to harm Connie.
Did you have much contact with Gaylord and Linda while you were living in Kenosha?
I did that for a while until I found out that why their kids had been taken away from them.
Sandra says Linda had lost custody of her daughters for putting them in dangerous situations with adult men.
Did they ever say anything to you about who their social worker was, or?
They just said that they were going to get even. And I didn't think too much about it, not at that time.
After wrapping up her interview with Sandra Bobo, Detective Funk brings Chester's wife, Linda Goulon, in for questioning.
Any information that I got, I put together on my own through all this time. I just told them that weird things was happening, and I told them that since we've been down here, my husband had been acting real funny.
According to Linda, while she and Chester lived in Kenosha for the decade after Connie Reyes' murder, he was always a little on edge. But once they moved to Mississippi in 2003, he seemed even more paranoid.
You know how you are when you have to watch over your back because you're afraid if you mess up, they're going to get you. Well, that's how he used to be once we got moved to Mississippi.
Linda Goulon told me things that only someone at the homicide would have known. For instance, that she was sexually assaulted. We never put that in the paper. A couple other details about what clothing she had on. He was saying things like that. And he could have only known that if he was in there.
Detective Funk immediately tracked down Chester Goulon a few towns away in Tupelo, Mississippi, to hear his side of the story.
I asked him to come with me, to talk to me, and he said, sure. I talked to Chester for probably 4 hours. Just asked him, what's going on here? Tell me what you told your wife. Tell me what you told Sandra. And he wasn't giving up a lot. He was just saying, oh, I just heard this or I heard that. And he was very nervous, very uptight.
Finally, after hours of intense questioning, Chester begins to crack.
We talked, and I got him to tell me what happened that night and how it happened. He had kept this inside for 13 years, and I believe he wanted to tell somebody.
Coming up, investigators finally hear the horrifying details of Connie Reyes' last moments.
When she opened the door, he put his foot in the door and then forced his way in.
Connie hits her head on the counter, falls to the floor, and then she's telling him to give her what she deserves.
13 years after the unsolved murder of Connie Reyes, Chester Gouland's guilt has finally consumed him, and he's ready to tell his story. Chester tells Detective Funk that Connie Reyes was the social worker on his friend Linda Dancer's child custody case.
Linda Dancer had 3 daughters, 3 little girls, who were removed from her custody by Connie Reyes, but she was allowed supervised visitation.
There were some issues between Gaylord and Linda in the home, and Connie apparently felt it was imperative to remove the children until they resolved some of their issues.
Linda was very upset and had been very upset with Connie Reyes for a number of months because her children being taken away.
According to Chester, Gaylord and Linda were scheduled to have a visitation on Thursday, April 12, 1990, until Connie became ill.
So later on in the evening now, they hook up with Chester Gouland. They pick him up at work. Linda is so angry about this no visitation that she's telling them that we're going to go get Connie. She's going to get what she deserves for not letting her see her children.
The decision was made that they were going to go over there, and they needed Chester Gouland to knock at the door because Connie Reyes opened the door for either Gaylord Gomez or Linda Dancer. These 3 losers sitting in a restaurant, drinking coffee, and planning a homicide.
Chester says he reluctantly agreed and rode with Linda and Gaylord to Connie's home that evening.
When she opened the door, Gaylord Gomez put his foot in the door and then forced his way in.
Linda shoves Connie to where Connie hits her head on the counter, falls to the floor, and then she's telling Gaylord to get her, give her what she deserves.
According to Chester, Gaylord did as he was told.
Gaylord is now on top of her, and Linda's down on the floor. Gaylord punches her in the face. We always thought Connie was bitten, but someone bit her left thigh. Well, that turned out to be boot kicks from either Linda Dancer or Gaylord Gomez.
Chester claims the scene was so brutal, he eventually went back to the car and waited for Linda and Gaylord.
So Chester Gouland inculpated himself in the homicide, but he denied that he actually murdered Connie, and he also denied that he sexually assaulted her.
He was going to be under arrest, and I informed him, Chester, you were there, you're part of this. There was plenty of evidence to charge first-degree homicide.
Kenosha police are now eager to question Linda Dancer and Gaylord Gomez. But first, they pull Linda's file from the Department of Social Services and discover a deeper connection between Linda and Connie.
Linda had a very difficult life. She had been the product of the foster care system herself.
It said she had to go to 3 different foster homes, and at that time, her social worker was actually Connie Reyes.
She already disliked Miss Reyes. When she was removed from her mother's home, it was by Miss Reyes, so there was an animosity there.
By the time she was 25 years old, Linda had 3 kids with multiple partners who did not stick around. Then, in 1985, she met and married Gaylord Gomez.
It was an unstable, dysfunctional relationship that existed between Linda Dancer and Gaylord Gomez.
Gaylord and Linda were married at the time of the homicide. Linda is a very persuasive individual. When it came to Gaylord, she could get him to do anything and everything that she wanted, or she would really be a nasty person to him and make his life miserable.
I met them in 1985. Gaylord was always scary. Chester, he was the shy person. He was the one that always tagged along, we did everything together.
All 3 of these individuals, in my personal opinion, they're all very street smart people. Linda had a history of stealing and being kind of a troublemaker.
With Chester in police custody in Mississippi, Detective Funk tells her colleagues in Kenosha to track down Linda and Gaylord immediately.
Linda Dancer was in Kenosha, as was Gaylord Gomez. They were divorced at this point in 2003. And I was assigned to go look for Gaylord. I had an address where we last knew Gaylord to live, and sure enough, Gaylord was there. So I asked him if he would come to the police department. He came voluntarily.
In the course of the interview, Gaylord denied anything about being involved. Detective Strash pinpointed that, I know you're not telling me the truth. I know this, and this is what Chester told us.
Like Chester, Gaylord eventually breaks down.
He got to the point where he admitted it, let it out, and he became very detailed and graphic in what happened.
But according to Gaylord, things didn't happen exactly how Chester had previously told detectives.
Gaylord Gomez said that it was Chester Gulan that strangled Connie Reyes.
Gaylord admits to sexually assaulting Connie, but claims he wasn't the only one.
Chester, he says, well, I'm going to get in on this, and he does the same thing.
With both men pointing the finger at each other, investigators turn to Linda Dancer, hoping to finally learn the truth.
When she did her interview, she sat down on the floor.
She said that Gaylord Gomez is the one that strangled Connie Reyes, and that she, Linda Dancer, had stepped between Gaylord and Connie to try to protect Connie. Linda Dancer, of course, doesn't accept any responsibility. That was not consistent with Chester Gulan's testimony and Gaylord Gomez's testimony, that Linda Dancer was the motivating force behind this home invasion, homicide, and sexual assault.
Detectives have heard enough, and on March 11, 2003, authorities charged Chester, Linda, and Gaylord with first-degree murder. It's not long before the news reaches Connie's family.
I found out while I was at work, so I quick rushed home. I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it after so long, you know. But I commend this lady that called the police and turned her husband in.
It was wonderful to hear that finally we have answers to this, or we can now maybe get some answers to this. Perhaps there can be some justice.
Coming up, Connie's killers finally have their day in court.
You could see the jurors at the time were just shocked at some of the information that they were receiving.
And more horrific details of Connie's final moments come to light.
It just tore me apart that they did stuff like that to her.
After they killed her and moved her body, they sang, "Clop, clop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is."
After 13 years, Kenosha police have finally arrested Linda Dancer, Linda's ex-husband Gaylord Gomez, and their friend Chester Gulan for the brutal murder of Connie Reyes.
The case based on what we call interlocking confessions. But we didn't have DNA testing. We didn't have physical evidence that linked any one of these three people to this crime.
There was one piece of evidence that was left, and it was a fragment of a pubic hair. And because it was a fragment, we couldn't match it to anybody. So there was actually no DNA evidence that we could use.
With no concrete evidence to go on, prosecutors must rely on the statements of each of the defendants to close the case.
Each of them pointed the finger at everybody else, and you simply can't try all three of them together. What you do in a case like that is you prosecute the case first that has the best confession. That was Chester Gulan.
I did talk to Chester one more time with a final attempt to try to get him to put himself in there, and I was able to do that. He did later on that afternoon. He said, yes, I was in there. I saw everything that happened. I said, Chester, they're telling me you had sex with Connie too after she was already dead. He would never admit to that.
So Chester Gouland's second statement inculpated himself in the homicide, but he denied that he actually murdered Connie, and he also denied that he sexually assaulted her.
Though he denies his involvement, Chester does give detectives one final chilling detail about the murder.
He said they all sang a song after it. After they killed her and moved her body, they sang "Plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is." And they were singing that song as they left the house.
It's just so dreadful that these people are responsible for the loss of a noble person like Connie Reyes.
I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe that Linda and Gaylord and Chester had anything to do with this. And I mean, I felt it right down in my heart for Miss Reyes. It just tore me apart that they did stuff like that to her.
As prosecutors head to trial, Gaylord has a change of heart.
The idea was to try Chester Gouland first, Gaylord Gomez second, and Linda Dancer third. Gaylord Gomez threw that off a little bit because he decided to plead guilty, which is very unusual for someone to plead guilty to a murder case, but that was what happened.
Gaylord saw the light and he pled guilty to avoid going to court. It was very difficult for him to testify.
So then we tried Chester Gouland, and I called Gaylord Gomez as a witness. We testified he implicated Chester Gouland, and Chester Gouland was convicted. And then we did Linda Dancer the very next week.
Prosecutors assert that Linda was the true mastermind behind this brutal crime.
It was just her personality that she got what she wanted, or she became aggressive, and I think that's why she snapped that day. She didn't get her girls for Easter, and that's what did it.
It's not so much that she did this out of love for her children. She did this out of resentment for the fact that somebody else would presume to tell her how she's going to live her life or take something away from her that belonged to her.
She wanted to get even with Miss Reyes for taking her children away and then canceling that last-minute visitation. Another important piece of the puzzle was Connie was the caseworker that pulled Linda and her siblings out of the home and placed into a foster home. Linda hated Connie so much that she wanted her dead.
Between the three partial confessions, Linda's defense seems bleak.
You could see the jurors at the time were just shocked at some of the information that they were receiving. You can imagine 12 people forced to listen to what was really ugly information. So it was an uphill battle to defend Linda Dancer. I fought as hard as I could given the circumstances.
Like Gaylord and Chester, Linda is found guilty of first-degree murder.
I did not go every day to the trials, but I did go to the sentencings, all three. They let us say some things. They let us make some comments before sentencing, so I did do that. That was tough. I read some Bible verses, and then I remember for Gaylord Gomez, when he left the room, he yelled, "F you!"
They all got mandatory life in prison.
When you get involved in a case, you live it every day until you get to the end. And I was just so relieved to see them all found guilty and all sent to prison for the rest of their life.
I felt relieved and hopeful that my aunt was finally at peace.
In 2007, 4 years after his sentencing, Chester dies in prison. Linda remains behind bars until her death in 2020.
My biggest regret is that they weren't convicted more quickly after her homicide. I regret that they had 1 day of freedom after they committed this terrible crime.
It was a violent, horrible crime, and she didn't deserve any of it. She was doing her job. She was watching out for these children. What they did to her was inexcusable, and she didn't deserve any of it.
I will say it's still hard to talk about, even after all these years. It really is. she took a part of they took a part of our family away, and you just never really get over it.
In 2015, Kenosha County Social Services launched the annual Connie Reyes Award for Excellence in Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention. Gaylord Gomez is serving a life sentence at the Columbia Correctional Institution. He will be eligible for parole in 2034.
When a loving mother is brutally murdered, accusations fly.
There were many different scenarios going around. Could the murder have something to do with her love life?
As the investigation heats up, police wonder if they're dealing with a greedy killer or a sinister setup.
We recognized that had black shoes on, but a lot of the policemen wore.
I think that they were afraid of her, afraid of the information that she had.
At the center of this building media storm is a blonde bombshell no camera could resist.
Everyone thought she was a knockout.
The press